In the vast land of Lysaria, the Forgotten Heir, Sarala, lay in a deep sleep, encased in an impenetrable cocoon of energy. The pendant around her neck pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, casting an ethereal glow over her delicate features. Her friends, Marin, Sir Alden, Raylan, and Torrin stood by her, taking turns to watch over her, their expressions a mix of concern and hope. Marin, his brow furrowed with worry, gently touched the edge of the glowing barrier. "Do you think she'll wake soon?" His voice was barely a whisper, laden with the weight of his fears. Raylan, standing nearby, nodded slowly. "She will. The magic of the pendant is ancient and powerful. It's healing her, preparing her for what's to come." Sir Alden, his eyes sharp and vigilant, glanced at Torrin. "We need to remain vigilant. King Eric won't rest until he finds a way to crush this rebellion." Torrin, his broad shoulders tense, tightened his grip on his axe. "Let him come. We'll be ready." In his castle, King Eric's fury was palpable. He paced the grand hall, his footsteps echoing ominously against the stone walls. His court stood at a distance, their faces pale with fear, eyes avoiding the wrathful gaze of their king. How could a mere girl and her ragtag band of rebels cause such trouble? Eric's voice was a low growl, filled with venom. "I will not tolerate this insolence." His advisors exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to placate their volatile ruler. One brave soul stepped forward, bowing deeply. "My liege, we will redouble our efforts. The girl will be found, and this rebellion will be quashed." Eric's cold, calculating eyes narrowed. "See that it is done, and remember, failure is not an option." In a hidden chamber far from the castle, 3 mages prepared for a long journey to Shadowspire. The blind mage, Eldric, and the hawk-eyed mage moved with purpose, gathering supplies and magical items essential for their quest. Eldric's piercing blue eyes scanned the room, his hands deftly selecting ancient tomes and vials of potent elixirs. "We must be prepared for any eventuality." The blind mage, Thorian, nodded, his sightless eyes seeming to perceive more than the physical realm. "The fate of Lysaria rests on our shoulders. We must reach Sarala and guide her." The hawk-eyed mage, "We leave at first light. The journey will be long, but we must succeed." With their preparations complete, the mages exchanged solemn nods, their resolve steeling against the challenges that lay ahead. The journey to Shadowspire awaited, and with it, the hope of a brighter future for Lysaria. The 3 mages began their long voyage toward Shadowspire, their cloaks billowing in the chill morning breeze. Eldric led the way, while the hawk-eyed mage walked with her usual alertness, eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. Thorian, the blind mage, followed with an eerie calm, his steps sure despite his lack of sight. As they traveled through dense forests and across rocky terrain, their conversation turned to the dire situation in Lysaria. "We must assume Eric's forces are everywhere," Eldric said, his voice a low rumble. "We can't afford any mistakes." The hawk-eyed mage nodded, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Agreed. Every step we take could lead us into a trap. We need to stay one step ahead." Thorian remained silent for a moment, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond their conversation. "The dark entity is still here," he finally said, his voice soft but filled with an undeniable certainty. "It knows Sarala is alive." Eldric's expression grew grim. "How can you be sure?" "The pendant," Thorian replied, touching the amulet hanging from his own neck, a replica used for sensing magic. "It's emitting far more energy than usual, and it's constant. I can feel its pulse even from this distance." The hawk-eyed mage glanced at Thorian, her eyes filled with concern. "What does that mean?" Thorian shook his head slowly. "I can't say for certain, but I believe the pendant is trying to heal or protect her. The problem is, this energy, it's like a beacon. The dark entity will sense it too. They will all know where she is." Eldric clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "Then we have no time to lose. We must reach Shadowspire before Eric's forces do. We need to ensure Sarala is safe and ready for what's to come." The mages quickened their pace. Each step brought them closer to Shadowspire, and each moment was a race against the unseen forces that threatened their cause. As they moved through the forest, their minds whirled with strategies and contingencies, determined to protect the young heir and restore magic to their beleaguered land. Thorian's brow furrowed as he felt the pendant's energy pulsate more intensely with each step. The sensation gnawed at him, a relentless thrum that he couldn't shake. He had tried multiple times to shield the pendant's energy, to cloak it from the dark entity's awareness, but every attempt had ended in failure. The pendant's power was too overwhelming, too persistent. His fingers brushed the amulet at his chest, a poor imitation of the true pendant of Sarala. Despite its limitations, it served as a conduit, allowing him to sense the immense magic radiating from Sarala's pendant. It was like trying to bottle a storm. The energy surged and twisted, refusing to be contained. A cold knot of dread settled in his stomach. The pendant was meant to protect Sarala, to aid her in restoring balance to Lysaria. But now, its constant activity posed a grave risk. Thorian's unease did not go unnoticed. Eldrick and the hawk-eyed mage exchanged worried glances, their expressions mirroring the anxiety that Thorian felt deep within his bones. "We must hurry," Thorian murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. The urgency in his tone was unmistakable. Eldrick nodded, his face set in a grim mask of determination. "We cannot afford any delays. Shadowspire is still a distance away, and we need to get there before the enemy does." The hawk-eyed mage scanned the forest around them, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "Let's pick up the pace. We can't let them find her first." With a renewed sense of urgency, the three mages quickened their steps, their cloaks snapping in the wind. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees casting long shadows that danced in the fading light. Every rustle, every whisper of wind through the leaves set their nerves on edge. Thorian's mind raced, searching for a solution, a way to shield Sarala and the pendant from the dark entity's prying senses. But the pendant's power was relentless, a constant hum that refused to be silenced. The feeling of impending danger grew stronger, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. They had to reach Shadowspire. Sarala's life, and the fate of Lysaria, depended on it. King Eric rode out from the castle gates, his dark hair whipping in the wind as he led a small group of his most trusted guards. The hooves of their horses pounded against the cobblestone streets of Eldarhelm, echoing like a war drum through the narrow alleys and silent squares. Eric's cold, calculating eyes scanned the horizon as they moved toward the ancient secret ground, a place known only to him and his dark master. The journey took them through dense forests and over rugged terrain, the king pushing his horse harder with each passing mile. His guards followed in silence, their expressions masked by the steel of their helmets. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grasp at their steeds' legs, creating an almost otherworldly scene that mirrored the dark purpose of their mission. As they approached the ancient ground, Eric signaled his men to halt. "Wait here," he commanded, his voice as cold as the steel of his sword. The guards nodded, reining in their horses and watching as their king dismounted and walked alone toward the circle of ancient stones, the weight of his presence seeming to make the very air tremble. The stones stood like silent sentinels, their surfaces covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly in the twilight. Eric moved with purpose, his every step echoing with the weight of dark rituals performed countless times before. He reached the center of the circle and began to gather dry branches and leaves, his movements precise and practiced, a routine etched into his muscle memory through years of sinister practice. Once the kindling was arranged, he struck flint to steel, sparking a fire that quickly grew into a small, crackling blaze. The flames danced, casting eerie shadows across the stone circle. Eric lowered himself to the ground, sitting cross-legged before the fire. He closed his eyes, allowing the rhythmic crackling to center his mind, shutting out the world and focusing solely on the dark task ahead. His breathing slowed, each inhale drawing him deeper into a state of meditation. The air around him grew colder, the shadows lengthening as if drawn to the dark energy he summoned. The runes on the stones began to pulse with an ominous light, syncing with the rhythm of his breath, their glow intensifying as the night deepened. Before long, a chill settled over the clearing, the fire flickering wildly as if struggling against an unseen force. Eric's eyes snapped open, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as the ancient evil creature began to materialize. Its form twisted and shifted, an amalgamation of shadows and malevolent energy, its presence a palpable force that pressed down on the very soul, making the atmosphere heavy with dread and foreboding. Eric watched as the creature fully took form, its eyes glowing a sinister red, burning with a hatred that seemed to emanate from the depths of the abyss. The air around it shimmered, distorting as if reality itself recoiled from the entity's presence. "You summon me again, Eric." The creature's voice was a hiss, a grating sound that seemed to scrape against the bones. "What is it you seek?" Eric didn't flinch, his face a mask of steely determination. "The girl," he said, his voice unwavering. "She has resurfaced. Her power grows. I need more strength to crush her and her allies." The creature's eyes narrowed, studying Eric with an intensity that would have made lesser men cower. "You tread a dangerous path, mortal. The power you seek comes with a price." "I am aware," Eric replied, his tone sharp, "but I will not let this girl, this prophecy, dethrone me. I will maintain my reign over Lysaria at any cost." The creature seemed to smile, though its mouth never moved. "Very well," it said, its voice dripping with malevolent glee. "But remember, Eric, the power I grant you is not yours to command. It will consume you if you falter." Eric nodded, his resolve unshaken. "I understand." The creature extended a shadowy hand, and a tendril of darkness snaked towards Eric, wrapping around his arm like a vice. The pain was immediate, searing through his veins, but Eric did not cry out. He gritted his teeth, his eyes locked onto the creature's, refusing to show weakness. The dark energy flowed into him, filling him with a strength that was both exhilarating and terrifying. His muscles tensed, his senses sharpened, and he felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever known. The connection between him and the creature deepened, a bond forged in the fires of their mutual malevolence. "Use this power wisely," the creature warned, its voice echoing in Eric's mind. "For if you fall, all you have built will crumble, and I will be there to collect what remains." Eric nodded, his eyes blazing with newfound determination. "She will not escape me. I will crush her and anyone who stands in my way." The creature's form began to dissolve, the shadows retreating back into the night. "Do not forget, Eric," it whispered as it vanished. "The darkness is always watching." As the last tendrils of shadow disappeared, Eric stood, feeling the dark energy coursing through his veins. He turned back to his guards, who had watched the ritual with a mix of awe and fear. "Prepare to move out," Eric commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "We ride to find the girl. The fate of Lysaria depends on it." The guards nodded, mounting their horses with renewed urgency. Eric climbed onto his own steed, feeling the weight of his dark purpose settle over him like a cloak. With a final glance at the ancient stones, he spurred his horse forward, leading his men into the night. While Eric rode away, the ground where the spirit had spawned began to tremble ominously. The ancient stones, etched with runes, pulsed with a malevolent glow, the intensity building until the air crackled with dark energy. The flames from the fire Eric had lit twisted and contorted, feeding off the sinister power seeping from the earth. A low rumble echoed through the clearing, growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly, with a deafening roar, the ground erupted in a violent explosion. Fire and debris shot skyward, and the very air seemed to ignite with dark flames. From within this inferno, 5 shadowy figures emerged, their forms taking shape as they rode out of the conflagration. These horsemen were clad in black armor that seemed to absorb the light around them. Their steeds, massive and nightmarish, snorted streams of smoke and flame. Each rider bore a different weapon: sword, axe, mace, lance, and bow, all gleaming with a dark, unholy aura. The first horseman, wielding a greatsword, raised his blade high, the edge shimmering with dark fire. His eyes, hidden beneath his helm, seemed to pierce the very soul of anyone who dared to meet his gaze. The second rider, with a massive axe, let out a guttural roar, the sound reverberating through the clearing and sending shivers down the spines of any who heard it. The third horseman held a spiked mace, its head glowing with a sinister light. He swung it with ease, the weapon's weight no burden to his supernatural strength. The fourth, with a lance as long as he was tall, pointed his weapon forward, as if already targeting some unseen enemy. The final rider, an archer, knocked an arrow on a bow of blackened wood, the arrowhead dripping with a dark, viscous substance. The horsemen rode in a tight formation, their movements synchronized and deliberate. As they circled the site of the explosion, the ground beneath them scorched and blackened. The flames from the initial blast began to die down, but the dark aura surrounding the riders remained, a constant reminder of the power they wielded. Without a word, the horsemen turned in unison and began to ride, following the path that King Eric had taken. The air around them seemed to chill, the very life draining from the land in their wake. Their purpose was clear, their destination set, and nothing would stand in their way. As they advanced, the forest seemed to recoil from their presence. Leaves withered and fell, the once vibrant greenery turning to ash. Animals fled, sensing the unnatural threat approaching. A silence, heavy and foreboding, settled over the landscape, broken only by the rhythmic pounding of the horsemen's hooves. The path they carved through the forest was one of devastation, an eerie testament to their dark mission. "We are nearing the source," Thorian said, his voice laden with gravity. The weight of his words settled over the group like a shroud. Eldrick, ever the strategist, walked beside him, his mind a whirl of calculations and contingencies. He understood the peril that lay ahead, but he also knew that there was no turning back. Their mission was too critical, the stakes too high. His piercing blue eyes scanned the path ahead, always thinking several steps forward. Suddenly, her eyes caught movement in the distance, shadows flitting through the darkness, barely visible but unmistakably there. Her heart quickened, and she narrowed her eyes, trying to discern more details. "We're being followed," Marilyn warned, her voice steely with determination. The others halted, their senses immediately heightened. Eldrick turned to her, his expression grim. "How many?" "Hard to say," she replied, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "But they're closing in." Thorian's face tightened. He could feel the dark presence growing nearer, like a storm on the horizon. "We must keep moving. We cannot let them catch us." With a renewed sense of urgency, the mages pressed on, aware that their mission had just become even more dangerous. The shadows continued to follow, a constant reminder of the peril that lurked behind them. The tension rose with every step, the fate of Lysaria hanging precariously in the balance. The mages knew they were being hunted, and their mission had just become even more dangerous. As they continued their journey, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence fell over the landscape. Without warning, the ground trembled, and the sky darkened further as 5 horsemen emerged from the shadows, their eyes burning with unholy fire. Eldrick, realizing the imminent danger, quickly raised a protective barrier around the group, the magical energy crackling as it formed a shimmering dome of light. "We must be prepared to fight for our lives," he said, his voice calm but laced with tension. Thorian began to chant a protective incantation, enhancing the barrier with ancient runes that glowed with a soft blue light. Marilyn, always quick to act, notched an arrow infused with her magic and fired at the horsemen. Each arrow struck true, but the horsemen merely absorbed the impact, their dark magic repairing any damage almost instantly. The battle was intense and relentless, the horsemen attacking with overwhelming force. Their combined dark magic pressed against Eldrick's defenses, testing the limits of the barrier. As the horsemen's attacks grew more ferocious, Eldrick's barrier began to falter. Cracks appeared in the magical dome, and the mages found themselves slowly being pushed back. The pressure was immense, and Eldrick gritted his teeth as he struggled to maintain the barrier. Thorian's incantation grew louder, his voice filled with urgency as he attempted to bolster the weakening defenses. Marilyn, her arrows nearly spent, drew her sword, ready to engage in close combat if the barrier failed. The situation grew increasingly desperate, and the mages realized they were on the brink of being overwhelmed. As the barrier continued to crack under the relentless assault of the horsemen, Eldrick knew their only hope lay in reaching Sarala. The resolve in his heart crystallized into a singular decision. "Thorian, Marilyn," he called out, his voice steady with resolve, "you must go on without me. I will hold them here." Thorian, sensing the gravity of Eldric's words, immediately protested. "Eldric, no. We need you at Shadowspire." Eldric shook his head, his expression firm. "This is the only way. Sarala is the key to Lysaria's future, and you must ensure she awakens. Go now." Marilyn's sharp eyes, usually cold and calculating, softened as she understood the weight of Eldric's decision. "You will not be forgotten, Eldric," she said, her voice betraying a rare hint of sorrow. Eldric gave a brief, reassuring smile. "Protect her. Protect Lysaria," he whispered, before turning his full attention to the barrier. Reluctantly, Thorian and Marilyn turned away, continuing their journey with heavy hearts. Eldric stood firm, focusing all his power on the barrier. With a deep breath, he began chanting an ancient spell, one that would consume his life force. The ground beneath him glowed with runes, and a vortex of light and shadow began to form around him, pulling in the horsemen. Sensing the immense power of Eldric's spell, the horsemen charged at him in a final, desperate attempt to break through. But Eldric, with a last surge of energy, released the spell. The vortex expanded, engulfing the horsemen in a blinding light. Their screams echoed through the air as they were torn from the mortal realm. As the light faded, Eldric collapsed to the ground, his life force spent. With his final breath, he whispered, "Protect her, protect Lysaria," before his body disintegrated, leaving only the faint glow of the runes as a testament to his sacrifice. Thorian and Marilyn pressed forward, determined to complete their mission. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the very air seemed thick with malice. Despite the peril, Marilyn, though weary, stayed alert, her senses finely tuned to any threats that might lurk in the darkness. As they approached Shadowspire Keep, the mages felt the potent magic radiating from Sarala's cocoon. The air hummed with energy. Thorian, with his deep connection to ancient magic, realized that the only way to awaken Sarala was to combine their powers with the ancient magic of the keep. "The keep itself is a source of great power," Thorian said, his voice tinged with awe. "If we can harness it, we may have a chance to awaken her." "We must act quickly," Marilyn urged, her voice tense. "The dark creature is near. We cannot afford any delays." "Eldric's sacrifice must not be in vain," he agreed, and the two mages quickened their pace, their goal clear in their minds. They knew that every moment counted, and that Sarala's awakening was their only hope for saving Lysaria. Thorian and Marilyn approached the foreboding gates of Shadowspire, their presence barely more than shadows against the vast stone structure. The air was thick with the remnants of old magic and the tension of an impending storm. Thorian's weathered face remained impassive, his blind eyes fixed ahead, while Marilyn's sharp gaze darted about. From the other side of the courtyard, Sir Alden and Raylan rode out to meet them. Alden's steed moved with practiced ease, the knight's posture straight and resolute. Beside him, Raylan's presence exuded an air of calm authority, his silver-gray hair catching the faint light that filtered through the dense canopy above. As they drew near, Raylan dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his age. His deep green eyes, sharp as ever, locked onto Thorian's form. "Thorian," he greeted, his voice carrying the weight of many years and shared struggles. "Raylan," Thorian replied, a faint smile touching his lips. Though his eyes saw nothing, his senses perceived much more. "It has been far too long, old friend." The two men clasped hands, a gesture of mutual respect and acknowledgement of their shared history. "Indeed," Raylan agreed, his voice warm with genuine affection. "We have much to discuss." Sir Alden, observing the exchange, felt a sense of reverence for the two elder mages. He knew that their combined knowledge and experience were invaluable assets in their struggle against King Eric. Marilyn stepped forward, her gaze steady. "We should not linger here. The keep awaits, and we have pressing matters to attend to." Raylan nodded, understanding the urgency. "Follow me," he instructed, turning back towards the entrance of Shadowspire. The group moved together, their footsteps echoing softly against the ancient stones. As they entered the keep, The heavy doors creaked and groaned before closing behind them with a resounding thud, sealing them inside the fortress that had stood as a sentinel through countless ages. Inside, the air was cooler, the oppressive heat of the outside world left behind. The walls seemed to whisper with the echoes of the past, the faint glow of magical runes casting a dim light on their path. Together, they ventured deeper into the heart of Shadowspire, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As Thorian and Raylan walked deeper into the heart of Shadowspire Keep, the memories of their shared past flowed silently between them, unspoken but deeply felt. Thorian's mind wandered back to the days when Raylan was a young, eager student. He remembered the first time he saw the spark of magic in Raylan's eyes, a spark that spoke of immense potential and a hunger for knowledge. Thorian had taken him under his wing, not out of obligation, but because he saw in Raylan the future of Lysaria's magical lineage. "Do you recall," Thorian began, his voice steady despite his blindness, "the time you tried to summon a storm without proper preparation?" Raylan chuckled, a sound that held both amusement and a hint of nostalgia. "I remember the aftermath more clearly. You made me clean the entire library as a lesson in humility." "You needed to learn that power without control is chaos," Thorian replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "And you did learn, eventually." Raylan's expression grew serious. "I did, thanks to you. Your teachings shaped everything I am today." Thorian paused, sensing the weight of Raylan's words. "And you have surpassed my expectations, Raylan. Your dedication to the principles of magic, to balance and restraint, has made you a beacon of hope in these dark times." Their journey continued in silence for a moment. Thorian placed a hand on Raylan's shoulder, a gesture of both comfort and affirmation. "We all make mistakes, Raylan. What matters is that we learn from them and grow stronger. You have done that, and I am proud of the mage you have become." Raylan met Thorian's blind gaze, feeling the depth of their connection. "And I am grateful for your guidance, Thorian. Without you, I would have been lost to my own arrogance." As they reached the central chamber, the runes on the floor glowed with a soft, welcoming light. Thorian's hand tightened slightly on Raylan's shoulder. "Remember, Raylan, the true power of magic lies not in its ability to destroy, but in its capacity to heal and restore." Raylan nodded, the lessons of his mentor echoing in his mind. "I will not forget, Thorian. Your wisdom will guide me, as it always has." Together, they stood at the threshold of the chamber, ready to combine their strengths and face whatever darkness lay ahead. Thorian and Raylan entered the chamber where Sarala lay cocooned in the pulsating energy of her pendant. The room hummed with ancient magic, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words and unfulfilled destinies. The glow from the runes cast eerie shadows on the stone walls, illuminating the somber faces of those gathered. Torin and Marin stood by Sarala's side, their expressions a mix of hope and exhaustion. Marin's eyes widened as he saw the mages approach, curiosity and anticipation sparking within him. He had heard stories of powerful mages, but had never been this close to their enigmatic presence. Raylan nodded to Torin, acknowledging the dwarf's steadfast presence. "Torin, it's good to see you. Your bravery in the face of such overwhelming odds is commendable." Torin grunted, his eyes never leaving Sarala. "We do what we must for Lysaria. She fought valiantly. Now, it's up to you mages to see her through this." Marin stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Thorian. "What will you do? How can we help her?" Thorian turned his sightless eyes toward Marin, his expression unreadable yet filled with an unspoken depth of knowledge. "I will awaken her. We will awaken her. But first, we must regain our strength and energy." Marin nodded, his eagerness tempered by the gravity of the situation. "What do you need from us?" Thorian's voice softened, carrying the weight of their recent loss. "We lost a great mage today. Eldric's sacrifice must not be in vain. We need time to meditate, to renew our strength." Torin's hand rested on Marin's shoulder, a silent reminder of their shared purpose. "We'll keep watch. Do what you must." The mages settled around the room, finding quiet corners to rest and meditate. Raylan closed his eyes, focusing on the steady rhythm of his breath, drawing energy from the ancient runes beneath him. Thorian, despite his blindness, moved with practiced grace, sinking into a meditative state, his presence a calming anchor in the turbulent sea of magic. Marin watched them with a mix of awe and reverence. He knew that the mages held the key to Sarala's awakening, and by extension, the hope for Lysaria's future. As he stood guard, he vowed to protect them, ensuring they had the time they needed to restore their strength. The room grew quiet, the only sound the soft hum of magic as the mages immersed themselves in their rituals. In the stillness, Marin felt a sense of peace, a brief respite from the chaos that had consumed their lives. Raylan and Sir Alden stood apart from the others, their faces lit by the flickering light of the runes. The gravity of recent events weighed heavily on them both, casting long shadows over their expressions. Alden broke the silence first, his voice low and filled with concern. "Raylan, what happened out there? What of the mages?" Raylan took a deep breath, his eyes closing momentarily as he gathered his thoughts. "We faced 5 horsemen, conjured by King Eric's dark powers. Eldrick sacrificed himself to banish them. His spell was powerful, but it came at a great cost." Alden's jaw tightened, his eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and anger. "It's a relief to know those 5 horsemen were banished from this plane. At least we won't have to face them again." Raylan's eyes opened, a somber look settling on his face. "No, Alden. Eldrick's magic was not strong enough to banish them from this plane entirely. They were driven from the battlefield, yes, but they will spawn again. His sacrifice gave us time, but it did not end the threat." Alden's shoulders slumped, the weight of the news pressing down on him. "So, that means we will see those riders very soon. We're not rid of them after all." Raylan nodded, the lines on his face deepening with worry. "Yes, we must remain vigilant. Eldrick's sacrifice was not in vain, but our fight is far from over." Alden's eyes hardened with resolve. "Then we'll be ready. We'll face them again if we must, for Lysaria and for those we've lost." At the crack of dawn, the remnants of the group gathered in the dimly lit dining hall. The air was filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and herbal tea. Alden and his friend Marin shared a small meal, quietly replenishing their strength after the long and taxing night. Marin broke off a piece of bread. "Where's Thorian?" a hint of concern in his voice. Raylan, sipping his tea, glanced up. "He wasn't here when I woke," he replied. "Perhaps he needed some time alone." The group fell silent, each member lost in their thoughts. Thorian's wisdom and presence had been a steadying force, and his sudden disappearance was unsettling. Meanwhile, Thorian, despite his blindness, moved through the ancient halls of Shadowspire Keep with a quiet purpose. His fingers traced the rough, cold stones of the walls, feeling the intricate patterns of the secret runes etched into them. The ancient magic thrummed under his touch, whispering tales of the past, the rise and fall of the keep, and the battles fought within its walls. He paused at a particularly worn section of the wall, his fingers brushing over a series of runes that glowed faintly under his touch. The runes told a story of an old alliance, of magic wielders who had once stood united against a great darkness. Thorian's brow furrowed as he absorbed the ancient knowledge, the weight of history pressing upon him. The energy of the keep resonated with him, and he could feel the echoes of long-forgotten spells and incantations. It was as if the keep itself was speaking to him, sharing its secrets and offering its strength. Thorian closed his eyes, letting the magic flow through him, connecting him to the very essence of Shadowspire. Satisfied that he had gleaned what he could, Thorian turned and made his way back through the winding corridors. His steps were sure, his mind filled with the knowledge he had uncovered. As he neared the dining hall, the sound of quiet conversation reached his ears. He stepped into the room, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the group. Raylan set down his cup of tea, relief evident on his face. "Thorian, where have you been?" Thorian offered a faint smile, his sightless eyes seemingly looking through them. "Exploring," he said simply. "The keep has much to tell if one knows how to listen." Thorian's voice cut through the heavy silence of the room. "We should start," he beckoned to Raylan, his tone firm but calm. Raylan nodded, understanding the gravity of what was about to transpire. "I will need your power too," Thorian added, his blind eyes seeming to pierce through the very air. "The pendant is so powerful that it will take everything we have." With a resolute nod, Raylan rose from his seat. Together, the two mages made their way to the chamber where Sarala lay encased in her cocoon of protective energy. The pendant around her neck crackled with a fierce, almost sentient energy as if it sensed the mage's intent. Raylan and Thorian sat down in a meditative pose, facing each other with Sarala between them. They took out their books, artifacts, and amulets, laying them carefully on the ground. "It is best if you leave us alone," Thorian said to the others gathered in the room. His voice held a note of finality that brooked no argument. Marin opened his mouth to protest, but the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He glanced at Sarala, then back at Thorian and Raylan. Reluctantly, he gave in, nodding his head and stepping back. The room emptied, leaving the two mages in a bubble of quiet anticipation. Thorian and Raylan closed their eyes, their breathing synchronizing as they began to chant in low, melodic tones. The air grew thick with the scent of ancient magic, and the runes around the room began to glow, pulsing in time with the rhythm of their incantations. The pendant around Sarala's neck reacted, its glow intensifying, casting eerie shadows across the walls. From the very walls of the keep, energy flowed to both mages, filling the room with an otherworldly hum. Thorian's blind eyes lit up with a rare smile, sensing the ancient magic awakening around them. "The keep has heeded my call," Thorian said, his voice filled with awe and reverence. Raylan felt the surge too, a palpable force that seemed to seep into his very bones. "The ancient powers of the great knights of the Vale," Raylan murmured, his eyes widening in realization. "They are still lingering here, joining our efforts to help the heir." The room became a nexus of raw, untamed power. The runes on the floor glowed brighter. Sarala's cocoon of energy pulsed in response, resonating with the same rhythm as the chanting mages. As the ancient energy mingled with their own, Thorian and Raylan felt their abilities amplified, their connection to the arcane deepening. The sheer magnitude of the power in the room was immense, a torrent of force that could reshape reality itself. It felt as though the very essence of the keep, the memories and valor of the knights who once defended it, had come alive to aid them in their critical task. Thorian and Raylan continued their incantations, their voices blending into a harmonious chorus that filled every corner of the chamber. The artifacts and amulets they had placed on the ground began to levitate, caught in the swirling vortex of energy. Sparks of light danced around Sarala's cocoon, creating a dazzling display of magic. The pendant around Sarala's neck responded, its glow intensifying to a blinding brilliance. It was as if the pendant recognized the power being channeled, accepting it, amplifying it. The cocoon around Sarala shimmered and expanded, its protective barrier becoming even more impenetrable. For a moment, Thorian and Raylan felt a deep connection to the very fabric of Lysaria, a sense of unity with the ancient forces that had long protected the realm. They knew that this was a pivotal moment, one that could turn the tide in their favor. The combined power of the mages and the lingering spirits of the great knights of the Vale created a beacon of hope that pierced through the darkness surrounding them. The air crackled with energy, and the very stones of Shadowspire Keep seemed to hum in resonance with the mages' efforts. The immense power in the room surged, creating a protective sanctuary around Sarala, ensuring her safety as she gathered the strength needed for the battles to come. Slowly, the energy in the room built up, swirling around them like a tangible force. Thorian's face remained serene, though beads of sweat formed on his brow. Raylan's hands trembled slightly as he focused, channeling his energy into the pendant. The cocoon around Sarala crackled louder, as if resisting the intrusion, but the mages held firm, their combined power pressing forward. The pendant pulsed violently, then settled into a steady, radiant glow, its power finally beginning to align with their efforts. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if their combined strength would be enough to awaken Sarala. Rain began to fall, a torrential downpour that engulfed Shadowspire Keep, soaking its weathered stones and filling the air with the scent of damp earth. Heavy thunder rumbled overhead, and lightning slashed through the darkened skies, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ancient stone walls. It was as if nature itself felt the magic surging within the keep, as if the gods were disturbed by the immense power being wielded within its confines. Sir Alden, sensing the brewing storm, began to order everyone to come inside and secure all doors and gates. The villagers and knights hurried to comply, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. The wind howled through the narrow corridors, and the castle's walls seemed to groan under the weight of the tempest, as if they too were straining against the storm's fury. Alden, Torin, and Marin made their way to the war room, their footsteps echoing through the stone halls. Outside, the storm raged with a ferocity that mirrored the tension within the keep, each clap of thunder a reminder of the stakes they faced. "What a storm," Alden muttered, his voice barely audible over the din of the thunder and the lashing rain. "How long will they be busy?" Marin asked, his eyes filled with worry and his voice trembling. "There is no way to know," Torin replied, his expression grim and resolute. "We can only wait and hope." The castle shook violently as lightning struck nearby, sending a tremor through the very foundations. Panic began to ripple through the inhabitants of Shadowspire, their fear palpable in the charged air. Alden and Torin did their best to calm them, their authoritative voices cutting through the chaos like a beacon. "Stay calm," Alden shouted, his voice firm and reassuring. "We are safe within these walls. Trust in the mages and in each other." Meanwhile, in Sarala's room, both Thorian and Raylan continued their intense magical work, their spells lighting up the air with a brilliance that seemed to rival the storm outside. Thorian's deep voice resonated as he began to speak in an ancient tongue, his words carrying a weight and authority that commanded attention and respect. Raylan, sweating from the exertion, glanced at Thorian with a mix of awe and disbelief. "Is he actually communicating with the pendant?" he wondered aloud, his voice filled with reverence. Thorian's voice grew even deeper as he invoked the ancient language of magic, ensuring the pendant recognized his identity and their intentions. His words were both a plea and a command, a call to the very essence of the pendant to acknowledge their purpose. "We seek to save Sarala," Thorian intoned, his voice echoing through the room with a powerful resonance. "We seek to protect her and to restore balance to Lysaria. Let her go, and let her awaken, so that we may care for her and for this land." The pendant's glow intensified, as if responding to Thorian's words. The air crackled with energy, and the cocoon around Sarala seemed to shimmer in response. The ancient magic was at work, and the fate of Sarala, and perhaps all of Lysaria, hung in the balance, awaiting the outcome of this pivotal moment. While Alden was looking into the distance from the war room, he noticed something strange. In the woods, almost out of sight, he seemed to spot a horseman waiting in the dark and the storm. The air felt colder, and an unsettling chill ran down his spine. He could suddenly feel its gaze piercing through the night. In shock, he looked to the other side and saw another one, equally menacing and still. He clenched his fists, a mix of dread and determination flooding him. "Thorin, Morelin," Alden's voice cut through the tension. "Get me that young squire, Elian. He's part elf." Within moments, Elian arrived, his half-elven eyes keen and alert. The squire's emerald gaze swept across the landscape, easily picking out the 5 horsemen standing in the storm, their presence unbothered by the raging elements. "They're surrounding us," Elian confirmed, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Morelin, with a quick incantation, confirmed the sighting. "Indeed, they are here. Their dark magic is palpable." Alden didn't waste a second. "Get me archers, longbows and crossbows, poison the arrows and bolts." The war room buzzed with urgent activity. Men and women moved with purpose, gathering weapons and preparing for the impending confrontation. 5 archers at each corner, ready to fire, Alden commanded, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. Marilyn stepped forward, her hawk-like eyes gleaming with resolve. "Give me the arrows," she demanded. I will put a spell on them to give them more power." Torin, standing resolute and unyielding, nodded in agreement. He knew the gravity of the moment and the importance of every action taken. Alden turned to his companions, his gaze firm and unyielding. "Now is the time for good ideas," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "We need to outthink and outfight them." Marilyn began chanting over the arrows, her voice weaving ancient spells of power and protection. Elian, with his heightened senses, continued to monitor the horsemen, ensuring they were aware of any movement. Torin coordinated the defenses, his experience and leadership evident in every decision. The storm raged on, but inside the keep, while the knights, squires, dwarves, and even villagers prepared and armed themselves, tension filled the air like an impending storm. Weapons clanged, voices barked commands, and hurried footsteps echoed through the stone halls of Shadowspire Keep. In Sarala's room, a different battle was reaching its climax. After a long struggle, the magical cocoon that had enveloped her slowly began to dissolve. The mages, Thorian and Raylan, their energy nearly spent, stood up with visible effort. "Get me Marilyn and healers, now!" Thorian's voice rang out, urgent and commanding. As the cocoon continued to fade, revealing more of Sarala, she looked pale but seemed to rest easy. Her breath came in regular, steady rhythms. The healers arrived swiftly, their eyes darting from the mages to Sarala, one of them immediately taking Sarala's pulse, the other preparing water and potions. Marilyn entered the room. She approached Sarala, her focus unwavering. Placing a hand on Sarala's forehead, she channeled her healing power. The air around them seemed to hum with a soft, radiant energy. "She's stable," one of the healers murmured, relief evident in her voice. "We need to keep her hydrated and continue administering these potions." Marilyn nodded, her hand still on Sarala's forehead. "She'll need rest, but she's strong. We can't let her slip away now." Thorian and Raylan, though visibly exhausted, exchanged a glance of mutual understanding and relief. Their combined efforts had not been in vain. The mages stepped back, giving the healers space to work while they observed, their roles shifting from active participants to vigilant guardians, ready to intervene if needed. Sarala's chest rose and fell rhythmically, her pale face slowly gaining a hint of color as the potions took effect. The healers worked methodically, ensuring her comfort and monitoring her vital signs with meticulous care. Every movement was precise, every action deliberate, as they applied their knowledge and skill to aid the young girl. Marilyn continued to channel her healing power, a steady flow of warmth and light that seemed to soothe Sarala's entire being. The room, filled with the soft glow of magic and the focused energy of those present, became a sanctuary amidst the chaos outside. The air hummed with an almost tangible sense of hope, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had brought them all together. As the minutes passed, the sense of urgency in the room began to ebb, replaced by a quiet determination. Sarala was stable, and for the moment, that was enough. The healers exchanged nods of reassurance, their hands never lingering idly. Thorian and Raylan, standing by with watchful eyes, allowed themselves a brief moment of respite, knowing the battle for Sarala's survival was far from over, but also recognizing the small victory they had achieved this day. The weather, which had been a tempest of rain and wind, suddenly calmed. It was as if an unseen hand had drawn a curtain over the storm, leaving a heavy, expectant silence in its wake. Sir Alden and Torin gathered in the war room, joined by Thorian and Raylan. The gravity of the situation hung in the air, unspoken yet palpable. Alden spoke first, his voice steady but strained. "We have no idea how many there are." "5," Torin interjected. "They will have no escorts." Alden frowned. "Escorts will run away in fear." "We need more magic for this," Thorian added, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. Meanwhile, in Sarala's chamber, Marin burst through the door. He rushed to her side, his face breaking into a relieved smile as he saw the faint color returning to her cheeks. Sarala lay still, her breath even and steady, surrounded by the gentle hum of magical energy. Back in the courtyard, Alden and Torin organized the defenses with precision. 2 lines of archers were set up, their bows strung and arrows at the ready. Spears were positioned in front, their tips gleaming menacingly. Behind them, the cavalry and elite dwarven warriors stood, their faces set in grim determination. "How do we get more magic?" Alden asked. "I can summon my mages," Thorian replied. "They would come and be here in 2 days, but without an escort, they are vulnerable." "We can ride out with extra horses and go get them," Torin suggested. "We can protect them." Alden's brow furrowed. "But what will the 5 horsemen do? Will they stay here or follow them?" "I think they will stay," Thorian said, "but I can cast a barrier to give them some time to put some distance between them." The plan began to take shape, each detail meticulously considered. The room buzzed with a sense of purpose, the camaraderie between warriors and mages growing stronger with each passing moment. Outside, the calm after the storm seemed almost eerie, a quiet before the impending clash. Yet within the walls of Shadowspire Keep, Alden's mind raced, the strategy forming like a blueprint in his thoughts. He turned to Torin and the others, his voice steady and clear. "All right, here's how we're going to do this," Alden began, his voice carrying a reassuring steadiness. "We have 5 horsemen and 4 towers with archers. We'll take the one near the gate and bolster it with more archers and a mage. Our focus will be on the horsemen closest to the gate." Torin nodded, his sharp gray eyes narrowing as he visualized the plan, the scar on his brow adding to his intense demeanor. "With some luck," Alden continued, "he'll either retreat into the forest or the others will come to his aid. While they rally, we ride out with our heaviest cavalry. They'll think it's an all-out attack." His voice grew more resolute, underscoring the urgency of their mission. Moralen raised an eyebrow, her fingers twitching with nervous energy. "And if they haven't rallied by then?" "We abort," Alden said firmly. "Everyone comes back, but if they do gather, we bombard them with arrows and bolts, supported by our elite cavalry." Raylan's eyes gleamed with approval. "And the trick?" Alden continued, his confidence growing. "As the cavalry charges, they split into 2 groups. The rear group heads straight to your mages, picks them up, and returns. The front of the attacking force circles back, defended by archers and mages, and rides back inside." Torin clapped a hand on Alden's shoulder, a rare smile breaking his stern face and softening his usual gruff demeanor. "That's a hell of a plan, my friend," he said, his voice carrying a warmth and approval that was seldom heard. Alden returned the smile, albeit with a hint of grim determination. "If all goes well." "And if the horsemen don't rally?" Raylan asked. "We abort," Alden repeated. "Everyone retreats to the keep." Thorian, who had been silent, spoke up. "What if they follow through the gates?" Alden's gaze hardened, steely with resolve. "We have 2 lines of archers and warriors, plus those who rode out, and the archers providing cover. If they follow us through the gates, the battle starts early. We'll fight them with everything we've got, no holding back." His voice carried the weight of a man ready to face whatever came their way. The room fell silent, each member of the group absorbing the gravity of the plan. Alden looked around, meeting each of their eyes. "This is our best shot. Let's make it count." With that, they dispersed, each to their assigned tasks. Torin approached Alden, a twinkle of mischief in his steely gray eyes. "I might have a little surprise for ye," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Alden raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What's that, Torin?" As if on cue, 2 dwarves emerged from the shadows, their sturdy frames moving with purpose. Each bore a bow that caught Alden's eye, a design unlike any he had ever seen. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each curve of the bow finely etched with intricate patterns that spoke of a mastery he could only admire. "These bows shoot very hard," Torin continued, gesturing to the dwarves as they approached. "And I mean very hard, but there's more." Torin lifted the lid of a weathered chest, revealing a collection of arrows that shimmered in the dim light. Alden leaned closer, intrigued. "These arrows are unique," Torin declared, his voice low and conspiratorial. He lifted one, its shaft glinting with an otherworldly sheen. "The alloy is a very rare combination of different elements. There's even silver in there and diamond." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't ask me how they did it, only the master of the forge knows how it's done." Alden examined the arrow closely, marveling at its construction. These might be very good against magical creatures, Torin added, pride swelling in his chest. Torin nodded, motioning for Alden to look closely at the arrowhead. Look at this, he instructed, pointing. It's made in such a way that it can penetrate deeper. You can even light them on fire. Alden's eyes widened as he understood the implications. Fire arrows, he murmured, feeling a rush of excitement at the thought of their potential in the battle ahead. Torin grinned, his beard shifting with the movement. With these in hand, we stand a much better chance. The dwarves exchanged knowing glances, their anticipation palpable as they prepared to arm the archers with these powerful new weapons. The archers looked in awe at the arrows, their eyes wide with amazement as they examined the finely crafted weapons. Better use your own bows, boys, Torin advised, his voice carrying a note of authority. You're used to them. The archers nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words, but the crossbowmen exchanged hopeful glances, as if they expected a similar treat. Torin caught their looks and shook his head with a wry smile. Not yet, he said, his tone firm. We're working on enhanced bolts, but we don't have them now. The crossbowmen sighed, their shoulders slumping slightly in disappointment. They knew that every advantage counted, and the promise of enhanced bolts gave them a glimmer of hope for future battles. Meanwhile, in a secluded chamber within the keep, Sarala began to stir. Slowly, as if emerging from the deepest dream, she awoke. Her vision was blurry, but she could make out a familiar figure beside her. It was Merrin. Sarala, Merrin said, his voice thick with emotion, tears of happiness brimming in his eyes. You are back. Sarala sat up, feeling an unexpected surge of energy coursing through her veins. She looked at Merrin, her expression one of confusion mixed with determination. What happened, Merrin? She asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. She reached out and took his hand, seeking both comfort and answers. Alden looked at his men in the courtyard, the flickering torches casting determined shadows across their faces. Defensive line. You must stay and hold the line in case someone breaks through the wall. You will have all our archers in the towers to help you. The men and dwarves nodded, their faces set with grim resolve. As long as the gate is not breached, or I give another order, you will stay here at the ready, Alden continued, his voice steady and commanding. The men and dwarves nodded once more, their collective determination palpable. Attack group, on my mark, you will ride out and attack the target or targets without mercy. Give them all you've got. A murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks, the tension thickening the air. For Lysaria, Alden declared, raising his sword high. For our home, for our way of life. For Lysaria, the men and dwarves echoed, their voices a thunderous roar that reverberated off the stone walls. Alden's gaze swept over the attack group, locking eyes with each warrior. Those in the rear of the attack group will either ride at full speed on my order to the place Thorian explained to get our allies, the hidden mages, or you will return with your group inside the keep if I order it. He paused, letting his words sink in. Be vigilant, be concentrated, be focused, be deadly. The knights nodded and roared, the sound like a rolling wave of defiance. They began clanging their swords against their shields, the metallic rhythm a war drum in the night. Sir Alden, they shouted in unison. Torin Ironfist, others joined, the dwarves' voices deep and resonant. For Sarala, for Lysaria, the cry rose, filling the courtyard with a fierce, unyielding spirit. Alden felt a surge of pride and purpose. He looked to Torin, who met his gaze with a fierce nod. Together, they turned to face the looming threat, united in their resolve to protect their land and their people. Alden looked at his ranged warriors in the tower. The elven squire had also joined, his keen vision and exceptional archery skills a valuable asset. He wielded a bow of elven design, its craftsmanship evident in its elegant curves and intricate carvings. Light his arrow, Alden ordered, his voice firm. Elian, the squire, knocked a flaming arrow and drew his bow, aiming with practiced precision. He released the arrow, and it soared through the air, a trail of fire behind it. The arrow struck the rider, causing him to recoil slightly. The fiery projectile fell to the ground, and the horseman quickly regained his position. Alden's voice boomed through the tower. All archers with flaming arrows, shoot at him. Crossbowmen, aim for the horse. Reload as fast as you can and do it again. You too, Ilian. The archers and crossbowmen sprang into action. Flaming arrows and bolts flew through the sky, striking the horseman and his mount. The horse neighed in distress, and the rider seemed momentarily puzzled by the barrage. Raylan, standing nearby, raised his staff and summoned a great fire atronach near the rider. The fiery creature roared into existence, its flames casting an eerie glow. At the same moment, Thorian fired a lightning bolt at the horseman, the crackling energy illuminating the night. The horseman was hit hard, the combined force of the fire atronach and the lightning bolt sending him backward. His horse roared in pain and confusion. "Another volley," Alden commanded. The archers and crossbowmen unleashed another round of flaming arrows and bolts. The sky filled with streaks of fire and steel, all aimed at the struggling horseman. "Keep an eye on the other riders," Alden added, his gaze sweeping the battlefield. The defenders in the tower remained vigilant, their eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. The relentless assault began to take its toll. The horseman and his mount were visibly weakened, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The flame atronach lunged at the rider, its blazing form crackling with intense heat. The horseman parried the fiery strikes with his dark blade, each clash sending showers of sparks into the night air. Flaming arrows rained down relentlessly, embedding themselves in the horseman's armor and piercing the flesh of his steed. Some arrows bounced off the enchanted plates of his armor, but others found weak spots, making the rider wince in pain and his horse stagger under the assault. With a final, furious shriek, the horseman slashed through the flame atronach, causing it to burst into a cloud of embers and acrid smoke. His victory was short-lived. Before he could catch his breath, a new and more formidable threat emerged. An ice atronach, larger and more menacing, materialized from the ether. Its crystalline body radiated a chilling aura that seemed to freeze the very air around it, and it let out a deep, resonant growl that echoed across the battlefield. The ice atronach advanced on the beleaguered horsemen, its fists like boulders of frozen power ready to crush anything in their path. The archers continued their relentless volley, flaming arrows streaking through the darkness. The horse, already struggling under the weight of its injuries, buckled further under the onslaught. The ice atronach swung its massive fists, connecting with the horseman's chest with a bone-crushing force. The impact sent the rider reeling, ice spreading rapidly across his armor. He fought back with desperate fury, dark magic swirling around his weapon. Another devastating swing from the icy giant smashed into the horse, causing it to whinny in agony and collapse under its own weight. Arrows continued to rain down from the defenders, each one finding its mark more easily as the horseman's defenses crumbled. His steed, now heavily injured and unable to rise, lay on the ground, its breath coming in ragged gasps. The horseman himself staggered, blood seeping through the gaps in his once impenetrable armor, his movements growing increasingly sluggish. The ice atronach roared, its breath turning the air to frost, and struck again. The battlefield was a maelstrom of fire and ice, and the horseman was caught in its merciless grip. The horseman shrieked, his eyes burning with dark energy. From his palm, he launched a heavy fireball that collided with the ice atronach, throwing the icy giant aside in a burst of steam and shattered ice. The force of the spell left the horseman trembling, but he turned his gaze toward the tower with grim determination. Another fireball erupted from his hand, streaking through the night sky. The power needed for such an attack made him fall to his knees, his strength visibly waning. "Get down or run away!" Alden shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The fireball hit the tower with a deafening explosion. The impact sent shards of stone and wood flying in all directions. Alden jumped aside just in time, rolling to avoid the worst of the debris. A few others followed his lead, hitting the ground hard but safe. But 3 archers and 1 dwarven archer, along with Elian, weren't so fortunate. They fell from the tower, their bodies engulfed in flames, their screams of agony echoing across the battlefield. Alden roared furiously, his heart aching at the sight of his fallen comrades. "Shoot at all the horsemen and keep firing." The mages had already summoned a magical shield, protecting themselves from the blasts and debris. The shimmering barrier held firm, keeping the mages safe from harm. Alden turned his attention back to the immediate crisis. "Put out the fire here and repair what you can," he shouted, directing the remaining soldiers. He raced down to the courtyard, his anger fueling his movements. He found his battle group, their eyes reflecting his own fury and determination. "Charge!" Alden bellowed. The gate creaked open, and the knights rode out with a fury that matched their leaders. Their horses pounded the ground, hooves kicking up dirt and debris. Swords were drawn, shields raised, and the knights formed an unstoppable wave of steel and resolve. The sight of the charging knights brought a surge of hope to the defenders still holding their positions. As Alden led the charge, he knew this battle was far from over, but he was determined to fight with every ounce of strength he had left. The horsemen sensed their companions' distress, a silent scream of pain reverberating through their dark bond. As one, they turned their focus towards him, their eyes blazing with malevolent light. The air grew thick with their collective rage. At that very moment, the horsemen received a full volley of arrows. Shafts of wood and steel streaked through the air, their tips gleaming in the dim light. Several found their marks, embedding in the dark armor of the horsemen. The wounded one staggered, his horse whinnying in distress. In their deep, dark form of communication, the horsemen rallied to their hurt companion. Their formation tightened, creating a protective barrier around him, a sinister dance of death and darkness. Alden rode out with his strike force, the clamor of hooves and the clang of armor creating a thunderous symphony. He glanced at the tower meant to provide cover, now nearly destroyed. Despite the damage, the remaining archers continued their relentless assault. On Torin's command, archers from the other tower rushed to aid their beleaguered comrades. The mages, though exhausted, fired beams of lightning and other energy attacks. No longer focused on a single rider, their efforts scattered, aiming to disrupt the horsemen's defense. The sky lit up with the crackling energy. The cavalry roared as they closed the distance, the sound a primal declaration of their determination. Yet the horsemen, sensing the impending clash, formed a small wall, keeping their wounded companion behind them. Their dark steeds pawed the ground, snorting defiantly. Raylan and Thorian watched the scene unfold, their faces etched with worry. Their strength was not at full power, drained from awakening Sarala and the ongoing battle. Thorian's heart ached with the desire for more mages, knowing their current numbers were insufficient against such formidable foes. "We need to break their line," Raylan murmured, his voice heavy with fatigue. "Agreed," Thorian replied, his eyes never leaving the horsemen. "But how?" Before Raylan could respond, the cavalry clashed with the horsemen's wall, the sound of metal on metal echoing across the battlefield. The horsemen held their ground, their dark energy a formidable shield against the onslaught. Alden's strike force pushed harder. The mages continued their assault, beams of light and energy slicing through the night. Each attack was a desperate attempt to breach the horsemen's defense, to find a way through the wall of darkness that protected their wounded companion. Torin watched the battle from a vantage point, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The knights and dwarves fought valiantly, but the horsemen's dark power was formidable. He could see Alden's forces struggling to break through the horsemen's defensive wall. Torin turned away from the sight and headed into the courtyard where the defensive lines were stationed. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of the soldiers waiting for his command. "Charge!" he bellowed, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "Help Alden destroy the riders. Go!" The knights and dwarves didn't need more. They sprang into action, marching with a determined stride to aid their comrades. Their movements were swift, their faces set with resolve. Marin approached, his brow furrowed with concern. "Is that wise? We have no defense here. We'll make sure they can't come. We must take them right there," Torin interrupted. "You see their power." A defensive line wouldn't have mattered. Marin nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He glanced around, taking in the scene with a critical eye. "What are you doing here, lad?" the dwarf asked, his tone softer. Torin turned around, only to see Sarala and Marilyn approaching. Sarala's pendant glowed with a fierce light, casting an eerie glow around her. "Oh, lassie, you're back!" Torin said with joy, a rare smile breaking across his rugged face. Marin stepped forward, his voice steady. "I told him everything, Sir Torin." Sarala nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "We must continue with the plan to get the mages. My sleep and magical healing have brought me back with full energy, and Marilyn is ready too. We'll go to the tower where the archers are. Marin is a pretty good archer himself. We will support the battle." Torin looked at them, his expression a mix of pride and determination. "Make sure the rear part of the strike force rides to get the mages. We'll support." As Sarala's pendant glowed, it seemed to pulse with an angry smile, its light a beacon of hope and power. Alden's fury mounted as he clashed with the dark horseman. He observed the wounded rider, now lurking at the back of the enemy lines, its strength returning at an unnaturally rapid pace. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Are they healing him?" he muttered through gritted teeth. Rage flared hotter within him, propelling him forward with a conviction he'd never known before. His forces pressed onward, the defensive line swiftly approaching. A voice echoed in his head, clear and commanding. "Break," Alden faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Break the group now," the voice insisted. It was Sarala, her presence unmistakable even in the midst of chaos. "Break!" Alden roared, his voice slicing through the tumult of battle. The rear part of the force immediately veered off, galloping in the direction Thorian had indicated. "Fall back!" Alden commanded his own men, his voice carrying authority and urgency. They retreated, the defensive line providing cover as they moved. Yet 2 of the horsemen broke off, pursuing the rear riders with dark intent, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. Sarala's eyes flashed with determination. "Now," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. Her pendant glowed with an uncanny energy, its light pulsating with raw power. With fierce concentration, she directed its force at the pursuing horsemen. The energy struck them with a blinding intensity. Simultaneously, Raylan and Thorian unleashed the remnants of their strength, magical bolts firing with desperate precision. Marilyn, still fresh and full of resolve, summoned her magic. Flaming missiles erupted from her hands, hurtling toward the horsemen. The air crackled with power as the combined assault bore down on their foes with relentless fury. Sarala, Raylan, Thorian, and Marilyn pressed their attack, each strike driven by the determination to protect their comrades and the hope of restoring Lysaria to its former glory. The horsemen's pursuit faltered, their advance halted by the relentless barrage, their combined efforts momentarily turning the tide in the chaotic battle, giving hope to those fighting for freedom. While the mages unleashed all their magic on the 2 horsemen pursuing the rear group, the remaining 3 horsemen endured a relentless rain of arrows and bolts. They held their ground, but slowly began to recoil under the unyielding assault. Marin, his eyes wide with both fear and insight, spoke urgently. "They'll flee. We've seen them regenerate." Sarala's voice cut through the chaos. "We can't beat 5 at once. We can probably not even beat 3 at once." She paused, the intensity in her gaze sharpening. "But we've shown we can weaken one and probably destroy him. Now we have to kill those 2 following our riders. The other 3 won't interfere. They're weakened for now." As she spoke, Sarala closed her eyes and summoned every ounce of her strength. A massive bolt of energy shot from her hands, hurtling toward the 2 pursuing horsemen. The sheer power behind it was staggering, lighting up the battlefield. Marilyn, standing firm beside her, added her own destructive magic to the mix. "I can summon one more Atronach," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "Then I'll be powerless." She raised her hands, calling forth a storm Atronach. The creature materialized in a swirl of dark clouds and lightning, immediately launching a ferocious attack on the horsemen. The ground trembled beneath its might. Sarala nodded, focusing her energies once more. She conjured a formidable wall of energy, blocking the horsemen's path and preventing them from following the rear riders. Meanwhile, the other 3 horsemen had retreated, their forms flickering and unstable under the continued barrage of arrows and bolts. They seemed unwilling or unable to engage further. Seizing the moment, Alden's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Charge!" he bellowed, his command echoing across the field. "Open the gate! All forces, attack the 2 followers!" With a thunderous creak, the gate swung wide, unleashing a torrent of warriors. Every able-bodied knight, dwarf, and villager surged forward, their collective roar a symphony of defiance. The forces of Shadowspire poured through the entrance, converging upon the 2 isolated horsemen. The ground trembled under the weight of their charge, the air thick with the clamor of battle cries and the sharp clash of steel. Alden's knights and Torin's dwarves surged forward with a fury born of desperation and hope. The ground trembled under the weight of their charge, the air thick with the clash of steel and the roar of battle cries. Sarala, though weakened, stood at the center, her hands ablaze with arcane power. She unleashed torrents of energy that crackled and seared through the air, targeting the 2 dark horsemen who pursued their comrades. Torin's dwarves formed an impenetrable wall, their shields and axes flashing in the dim light as they engaged the horsemen. Each strike was precise. Alden's knights flanked the dwarves, their swords cutting through the air with deadly precision. The 2 horsemen, though formidable, began to falter under the relentless assault. Sarala's magic intertwined with the physical prowess of the knights and dwarves. Bolts of energy and elemental fury bombarded the horsemen, breaking through their dark defenses. The combined force was overwhelming. With a final, desperate push, the 2 horsemen were driven to their knees. Alden, leading the charge, delivered the final blow, his sword glowing with a strange, radiant light. The horsemen disintegrated, their dark forms crumbling into ash and dust. Alden, panting heavily, watched as the remains of their enemies scattered in the wind. Without hesitation, he ordered the ground where they had fallen to be burned. Flames roared to life, consuming the earth and ensuring no trace of the dark magic remained. "Make sure they don't come back," Alden muttered. The journey back to Shadowspire Keep was arduous. Alden, weakened by a wound he had sustained in the battle, nearly fell from his horse as they approached the gates. Torin ordered his men to take Alden inside immediately. "Get him to bed," Torin commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "Have his wound looked after, and make sure the towers are watched at all times. Guards in the war room, keep an eye out." As Alden was carried to his chambers, Torin turned his attention to the mages. "You all need to rest," he said, his tone softer but no less firm. "Gather your energy, we'll need you again soon." Marin, standing nearby, nodded in agreement. "I'll stay awake with you," he offered, his eyes reflecting the same determination as Torin's. The mages reluctantly agreed, retreating to their quarters to regain their strength. King Eric's rage echoed through the grand hall of Eldarhelm, a storm of fury barely contained within his imposing frame. He had tried to summon his Dark Lord, yet there was no reply. The silence was maddening, an affront to his authority and his desperation. He paced the room, the rich, regal clothing that adorned him rustling with every agitated step. The news from his spies had been a bitter pill to swallow. The demonic riders he had sent to crush the rebellion had failed, 2 of them destroyed. He could hardly fathom it. "How could Alden do that?" he snarled, his voice reverberating off the stone walls. "What power does he possess?" His advisors dared not speak, fearing the king's wrath. Eric's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Alden, a disgraced knight, now stood against him with a strength that defied reason. There was something more at play, something Eric needed to understand. His Dark Lord had the answers, and he would have them, no matter the cost. Eric stopped his pacing abruptly, his decision made. He would not return to the ritual site, not again. The place reeked of desperation and dark promises that seemed ever more distant, his expression a mask of cold determination. "I demand to speak with my Dark Lord here," he commanded, his voice a dangerous whisper that brooked no dissent. "Prepare the chamber, now." The advisors hurried to obey. Eric's mind was a maelstrom of anger and frustration. He needed answers, he needed power, and he would stop at nothing to maintain his iron grip on Lysaria. As his advisors scurried about, preparing the chamber for the summoning, Eric's thoughts returned to Alden and the rebellion. The knight's unexpected strength was a threat, one that needed to be understood and eradicated. Eric clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "I will find out what happened," he muttered to himself, his eyes narrowing, "and I will crush them all." The chamber filled with the acrid scent of burning incense, the air thick with dark energy as King Eric stood at the center, arms raised in summoning. His voice echoed, chanting in the ancient tongue, desperate to reach the malevolent force that had granted him power. The runes on the floor glowed dimly, pulsing in time with his words, but the entity remained silent. Sweat beaded on Eric's forehead, his frustration mounting. He needed answers, needed power. But the silence was deafening, a void that mocked his desperation. Finally, he lowered his arms, his breathing ragged, his chest heaving from the exertion. "Damn you," he hissed to the empty air. The runes flickered and died, leaving him in the dim light of the chamber's torches. Anger bubbled within him, a volcanic force seeking an outlet, threatening to erupt. He turned to leave, his steps heavy with fury. As he reached the ornately carved door, a lone guard stood there, eyes fixed on the ground. "Have I not told everyone to leave the room?" Eric snarled, his voice a dangerous growl, the sound reverberating off the chamber walls. The guard looked up, a hint of sarcasm in his eyes. "You say many things, King Eric." Rage flared within Eric, and he raised a hand, summoning his dark power. He would teach this insolent guard a lesson. Energy crackled around his fingers, but before he could release it, the guard's eyes flashed with a hidden power. With a small flick of the guard's hand, Eric was hurled across the throne room, his body slamming into the cold, unforgiving stone floor. He lay there, astonished, pain radiating through him like a wildfire. The guard's footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate, as he approached the fallen king. "So, my king," the guard's voice dripped with contempt, "who do you think you are exactly?" Eric shut his mouth, watching the guard approach with a mixture of fear and disbelief. How could this be happening? He had gained so much power through the dark entity, yet here he was, at the mercy of a mere guard. Summoning his strength, Eric roared, directing a powerful energy attack at the guard. The force was immense, enough to obliterate any normal being, but the guard just continued walking, the energy passing right through him as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze. The guard laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Eric's spine. "Really, Eric? What do you think you can do?" The guard lifted his head, a vicious smile spreading across his face. Suddenly, Eric felt himself lifted into the air, paralyzed, unable to move. The guard's laughter echoed in his ears, a haunting melody of dominance. "You are nothing, Eric," the guard said, his voice filled with disdain. "You are my servant." With a final mocking laugh, the guard released him, and Eric fell to the ground, pain searing through his body as he lay there, utterly defeated. His mind raced, grappling with the reality that his reign, built on fear and dark magic, had brought him to this humiliating end. Eric struggled to his feet, his body trembling with a volatile mix of pain and unbridled rage. The guard stood motionless before him, his mocking smile never wavering, a cruel twist that seemed to mock Eric's very existence. In that moment, Eric's eyes blazed with fury, but he couldn't deny the sickening truth. He was at a distinct disadvantage. This was no ordinary guard. This was something far more sinister, a manifestation of his own fears made flesh. "You seek advice, Eric," the guard said, his voice dripping with condescension, as if he were addressing a child rather than a king. "But the situation gets more interesting, doesn't it?" The words curled around Eric like smoke, suffocating and taunting. Eric clenched his fists, the knuckles turning a stark white against the backdrop of his regal attire. He had never felt so powerless, so exposed, like a king stripped of his crown and left to the whims of fate. The guard's words cut deep, slicing through the carefully constructed facade of control that he had upheld for so long, leaving him vulnerable to the piercing truths beneath. Anyway, the guard said, his voice softening to a dangerous whisper that slithered through the air, if you want advice from the dark side, I will be your new contact. Eric's eyes narrowed, suspicion mingling with a desperate need for power. He needed to maintain his grip on Lysaria, a kingdom teetering on the brink of chaos. But could he trust this enigmatic figure, this embodiment of the very darkness he had sought to control? Could he afford not to? What do you want from me? Eric demanded, his voice a precarious blend of defiance and fear, fighting to mask the tremors of uncertainty that threatened to betray him. The guard's smile widened, a predator savoring its prey, relishing the moment. What I want, Eric, is very simple. I want to see you succeed, to see you maintain your throne. But you must understand that power comes at a price. The guard's tone was almost seductive, luring Eric into a web of temptation. He had sacrificed so much already, had plunged Lysaria into darkness to secure his reign, drowning his kingdom in fear and despair. But was he willing to pay an even steeper price, to barter away the remnants of his soul for the promise of power? The guard extended a hand, an offer laden with both promise and peril, the air crackling with unspoken possibilities. Join me, Eric. Embrace the darkness fully, and you will have the power you seek. The invitation hung in the air, both alluring and dangerous, like a siren's call echoing through stormy seas. Eric stared at the outstretched hand, his mind racing with the weight of this moment. This was his moment of decision, a crossroads that would irrevocably determine his fate and the fate of his kingdom. The guard's eyes bored into him, a silent challenge that dared him to choose. With a heart heavy with uncertainty, Eric reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he grasped the guard's. The contact was electric, a surge of dark energy that flowed through him like wildfire, igniting his veins with raw, intoxicating power that whispered promises of dominion. The guard's smile grew, a satisfied gleam shining in his eyes, a reflection of the darkness that now bound them. Welcome to the true darkness, King Eric. Now, let us begin. But wait, Eric said, his voice hoarse and strained. Who are you? The guard's grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than humanly possible, glinting ominously in the dim light. I am the Shadow King, he replied, his voice dripping with malevolence and a chilling certainty. Eric recoiled slightly, his grip faltering but not breaking. I am your king, Eric, he insisted, trying to muster his usual authoritative tone, though it sounded weak even to his own ears. The Shadow King's laughter filled the chamber, a sound that echoed off the ancient stones and seemed to seep into Eric's very soul. It was a laughter that held no warmth, only a cold, calculating amusement that sent shivers down his spine. King Eric, the Shadow King mocked, shaking his head slowly with a predatory gleam in his eyes. You are but a pawn in a game far greater than you can comprehend. Eric's hand trembled, and he pulled it back, wiping it on his regal robes as if to rid himself of the Shadow King's touch. His mind raced, struggling to grasp the full extent of what he had just heard. The words echoed in his head, each one a dagger to his pride and sense of control. The Shadow King's eyes gleamed with a dark light, and he took a step closer to Eric, towering over him. You may sit on the throne, he said, his voice a sinister whisper that seemed to wrap around Eric like a suffocating cloak, but it is I who wields the true power. Eric swallowed hard, his throat dry and parched. He wanted to argue, to assert his dominance, but the words caught in his throat. He had always known he was playing with forces beyond his control, but this was something else entirely, something far more terrifying. The Shadow King laughed again, a sound that seemed to make the very shadows dance around them. Do not worry, Eric, he said, almost soothingly, with a touch of mockery that stung. Our goals are aligned, for now. Eric's mind raced with questions, doubts, and a growing sense of dread, but he forced himself to nod. Very well, he said, his voice steadier than he felt, though his heart pounded in his chest. But remember, I am still king. The Shadow King's smile never wavered, a smile that promised nothing but darkness. Of course, Your Majesty, he said with a mocking bow, his eyes never leaving Eric's. For now. Chapter 14. The night settled heavily over Shadowspire Keep, a fortress of ancient stone standing resilient against the encroaching darkness. Flickering torches cast long, restless shadows along the walls, painting the halls with a sense of eerie vigilance. Though fortified and formidable, the keep felt like a lone sentinel surrounded by a vast, unseen menace. Inside the war room, the air was thick with tension and a fragile hope. A large, weathered table took center stage, its surface littered with maps, battle plans, and hastily scrawled reports. A dim chandelier and the soft glow of the fireplace provided scant illumination, casting wavering light on the gathered faces. Alden leaned over the table, his eyes scanning the maps. "The recent battle," he began, his voice steady, "showed us both our strengths and weaknesses. We defeated 2 of the horsemen, but it came at a cost." Raylan, standing beside him, nodded thoughtfully. "The magic we used was potent, but the power behind those horsemen is vast. We must be prepared for them to return with even greater force." Thorian, seated at the far end of the table, leaned forward. "We need to anticipate King Eric's next move. He won't rest until he crushes us." The group fell silent. Torin broke the silence, his voice gruff but determined. "We must fortify the keep further. Gather more allies. Prepare for another attack." Sarala, still pale from her recent ordeal, listened intently from her chair near the fireplace. Though recovering, her eyes were sharp, reflecting the gravity of the situation. She understood her role was pivotal in the battles to come. Morellen placed a reassuring hand on Sarala's shoulder. "Your strength is growing, Sarala. With each day, you'll be more prepared to face what's ahead." Alden straightened, his resolve evident. "We need to focus on our defenses. Torin, can your dwarves reinforce the walls and gates?" Torin nodded. "Consider it done. We'll make this keep impregnable." Thorian added, "We should also send out scouts to gather intelligence on Eric's movements. Knowledge will be our greatest asset." Raylan glanced at Sarala. "And you, Sarala, must continue your training. Your power is the key to our victory." Sarala nodded, determination etched on her face. "I won't let you down." The group continued their discussion, laying out plans and contingencies, each member contributing their expertise. The atmosphere, though tense, carried an undercurrent of unity and purpose. The mages, huddled together in a secluded glade, looked up with weary eyes as Alden's knights approached. Among Alden's knights, Sir Robert stepped forward. His demeanor was resolute, his voice steady. "We come with dire news and a mission," he announced, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "Eldrick has fallen, but we cannot let his sacrifice be in vain." Fear flickered across the faces of the mages. The news hit them like a hammer blow. Eldrick, their revered leader, had fallen. A state of defeatism and sorrow enveloped the mages. Eldrick had been their guiding light, the one who had always known the way forward. Now, with his loss, the path seemed obscured by a thick fog of despair, but it was quickly followed by a spark of anger. The injustice of Eldrick's death fueled their determination. They were no longer just mages in hiding, they were avengers of their fallen leader. Robert continued, "I am here with an escort and spare horses. We have come to fetch you and bring you safely to Shadowspire Keep. Sir Alden and the others are preparing for the battles to come, and your presence is needed." The mages exchanged glances, the weight of their decision evident in their eyes. Robert's words carried not just the promise of safety, but also a call to arms, a reminder of the fight that lay ahead. "And there's more," Robert added, his voice lowering as if to underscore the gravity of his next words. 5 hellish horsemen were sent by King Eric. We managed to defeat 2 of them, but the threat remains. Your skills, your magic, are crucial if we are to stand a chance against the remaining horsemen and the darkness that follows them. The mages felt a renewed sense of purpose. They knew the risks, the dangers that lay ahead, but they also knew they couldn't remain in hiding any longer. Eldrick's sacrifice had to mean something. They would honor his memory by continuing the fight. The mages gathered what they needed swiftly. Hands moved with practiced precision, collecting artifacts and scrolls, securing them in leather satchels. Their faces, etched with a mixture of sorrow and determination, spoke of the urgency of their task. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing the weight of the moment. One mage paused to adjust the strap of a worn bag, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of a pendant hidden within. With their preparations complete, the mages mounted the horses provided by the knights. The animals shifted uneasily under the weight of their new riders, but the knights' steady hands and reassuring murmurs soon calmed them. Robert mounted his steed and looked back at the group. "Let's ride," he said, his voice carrying a note of finality. He spurred his horse forward, taking the lead. The journey back to Shadowspire began with a sense of urgency. The knights and mages moved as one, their ranks tight, their movements synchronized. The path through the forest was narrow and treacherous. Each step forward brought them closer to their destination, yet the emotions swirling within the group were far from uniform. For some, there was a sense of hope, a belief that they could make a difference in the battles to come. For others, there was fear, the uncertainty of what lay ahead casting long shadows over their thoughts. But all shared a common thread of determination, a resolve to see their mission through to the end. Robert rode ahead, his eyes scanning the path before them. His thoughts were a whirlwind of strategy and concern, but he kept his focus on the task at hand. He knew the importance of their journey, the vital role the mages would play in the defense of Shadowspire. As the leader of this convoy, it was his duty to ensure their safe arrival. The forest began to thin, the trees giving way to open land. The sight of the horizon brought a fresh wave of resolve to the group. They rode on. As they rode through a dense thicket, the path narrowed, forcing the group into a single file. The forest seemed to grow darker, the air thick with an eerie stillness. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs. A group of ragged bandits, their faces twisted with malice, emerged from the underbrush, blocking the path. Alongside them, small, vicious goblins snarled and brandished crude weapons. "Hold!" Robert called out, raising a hand to halt the group. The knights immediately drew their swords, the sound of metal ringing through the air. The mages dismounted, their hands already glowing with the promise of magic. One of the bandits, a scarred man with a crooked grin, stepped forward. "Looks like we got ourselves a prize," he sneered. "Hand over your valuables, and maybe we'll let you live." Robert's expression hardened. "We do not have time for this," he said coldly. "Stand down or face the consequences." The bandit laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Brave words for a man outnumbered. "You are the ones who are outnumbered," he said, his tone carrying a quiet authority. "Leave now, and you may yet see another day." The bandits and goblins laughed, but their mirth was short-lived. With a nod from Robert, the knights charged forward, their swords flashing in the dim light. The mages followed, their hands weaving intricate patterns in the air, calling forth spells of fire and lightning. The battle was swift and decisive. The bandits, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, fell back under the relentless assault. The goblins, though fierce, were no match for the combined might of the knights and mages. Robert cut down the scarred bandit with a single powerful stroke, his expression one of grim determination. Around him, the other knights dispatched the remaining foes with practiced ease. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of steel and the crackle of magic. Within moments, it was over. The bandits and goblins lay defeated, their bodies scattered among the fallen leaves. The knights and mages regrouped, their expressions resolute. "Let's move," Robert said, his voice firm. "We still have a long way to go." In the shadowed depths of Shadowspire Keep, Thorian called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Raylan, come here. I need your assistance." Raylan, his robes whispering against the floor, joined Thorian with a sense of urgency. The blind mage stood before a massive wooden door, intricately carved with symbols of an ancient order. With a touch of his hand, the door creaked open, revealing a hidden library within. Thorian extended his hand, conjuring a soft, glowing orb of light that illuminated the room. Shelves lined with books stretched up to the ceiling, untouched by time. Dust motes danced in the light, adding to the air of mystery and wonder. Raylan's eyes widened, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "It looks untouched," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. Thorian moved with the confidence of someone who knew the layout by heart, despite his lack of sight. He found a sturdy wooden table in the center of the room and sat down. "Tell me, Raylan, what books are here, and find any that mention the Knights of the Vale." Raylan nodded and began his careful examination of the shelves. His fingers traced the spines of the ancient tomes, his eyes scanning the faded titles. He pulled out volumes and placed them gently on the table before Thorian, creating small stacks of potential treasures. Meanwhile, in the underground forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal echoed through the cavernous space. The master of the forge, his face streaked with soot, focused intently on crafting a sword. Sparks flew with each strike, the blade taking shape under his skilled hands. Torin watched, his broad shoulders framed by the flickering light of the forge. His eyes moved to a set of armor displayed nearby, the master's recent creation. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each piece fitting together with precision. Torin's admiration for the master's work was palpable, a deep respect for the art of forging weapons that could turn the tide of battle. In the courtyard, Sir Alden leaned against a wooden post, his side bandaged but his spirit unbroken. He observed his men as they trained and sparred, their movements a blur of steel and determination. He called Marin over, the young man's curiosity evident in his eyes. "Watch closely," Alden instructed, demonstrating a series of precise sword maneuvers. "It's all about balance and timing. A slight shift in your stance can make all the difference." Marin mimicked the movements, his form improving with each attempt. Alden nodded in approval, his gaze shifting back to the courtyard, where the clang of swords and the shouts of men filled the air. Sarala and Marilyn sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, their eyes closed, breaths synchronized in a rhythmic harmony. A faint, shimmering glow surrounded them, the product of their shared meditation, casting ethereal patterns on the walls. The room was steeped in a profound sense of calm and focus, interrupted only by the occasional flicker of magical energy that danced around them. Marilyn opened her eyes first, her hawk-like gaze settling on Sarala with an intensity that spoke of unspoken wisdom. "I think you're ready for something more advanced," she said, her voice low and steady, a whisper of promise. Sarala's eyes fluttered open, curiosity and eagerness lighting up her emerald green eyes like twin beacons. "Show me," she replied, her voice tinged with anticipation and a hint of reverence. With a fluid motion, Marilyn extended her hand, conjuring a series of small, intricate illusions that hovered in the air between them. Each illusion shimmered and danced, shifting through a kaleidoscope of shapes and colors, mesmerizing in their complexity. Sarala watched with rapt attention, her focus intense, as Marilyn manipulated the illusions with deft, practiced movements. "These rings," Marilyn said, producing a set of ornate bands from a pouch at her waist, "will help you channel your magic more efficiently." She handed the rings to Sarala, who examined them closely, her fingers tracing the ancient runes engraved on their surfaces. The rings gleamed with latent power. "Thank you," Sarala whispered, slipping the rings onto her fingers. She could feel the magic coursing through them, a gentle hum that resonated with her own abilities, amplifying them. At that moment, the heavy door to the chamber creaked open, and Torin entered. His presence was commanding, his expression one of determined purpose. "Marilyn," he called, his voice echoing in the room. "Are you a rune crafter?" Marilyn nodded, her sharp features softening into a smile. "I am," she replied, her tone warm yet authoritative. Torin's own smile was brief but genuine. "I need your services," he said, his tone indicating the gravity of his request. Marilyn rose gracefully, casting a final, reassuring glance at Sarala before following Torin out of the chamber. They walked through the dimly lit corridors, the air thick with the scent of metal and magic, until they reached the forge, where the heart of their resistance beat strongest. In the courtyard, the clashing of swords rang out, drawing the attention of the gathered knights. Marin and Sir Alden were locked in a sparring match, their movements a blur of skill and precision. The knights cheered them on, their voices rising in a chorus of encouragement and admiration. Merrin moved with surprising agility, adapting quickly to Alden's strikes and countering with impressive speed. Alden, his brow furrowed in concentration, couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Merrin's rapid progress was extraordinary, almost unnatural. As they continued their bout, Alden's mind raced with questions. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Merrin's abilities, something beyond mere talent. The thought nagged at him, a mystery that demanded to be unraveled. Marilyn and Torin entered the forge, the air thick with the scent of molten metal and the rhythmic clanging of hammer on steel. The master of the forge, a burly dwarf with arms like tree trunks, remained engrossed in his work, meticulously shaping a glowing sword on the anvil. Sparks flew with each strike, illuminating his focused expression. Torin led Marilyn past the master until they reached a pedestal where a set of armor stood in all its glory. The armor gleamed under the flickering torchlight, each piece meticulously crafted and polished to perfection. Intricate designs adorned the metal, reflecting the craftsmanship and dedication that had gone into its creation. Marilyn's eyes widened, her sharp gaze taking in every detail. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her voice filled with genuine awe. The armor was not just a piece of protection. It was a work of art. Torin's stern face softened into a proud smile. "Aye, it is," he agreed, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. He turned to her, his expression becoming more serious. "Would you edge runes into the armor to strengthen its defensive capabilities, or even enchant it so it becomes an armor worthy of a defender of worlds?" Marilyn looked at Torin for a long moment, her piercing gaze searching his face. She could see the hope and determination in his eyes, the weight of his people's expectations. Slowly she smiled, a determined glint in her eyes. "I can," she said, her voice steady and confident. "I will," she added, her tone resolute. She reached out, her fingers tracing the lines of the armor, already envisioning the runes and enchantments that would transform it into a legendary piece of defensive magic. "Good," Torin nodded, his smile widening. Torin watched the mage at work, his steely eyes never leaving Marilyn's deft hands. Each movement she made was precise, each gesture purposeful. She held a fine chisel, its tip glowing faintly with her magical energy. As she pressed it against the armor, intricate runes began to take shape, the metal yielding to her will with an almost organic fluidity. Marilyn's lips moved in silent incantations, her breath steady and controlled. The runes glowed faintly as she etched them, the magic within them coming to life with each whispered word. Her concentration was absolute. Torin stood there, absorbing every detail. He did not move, nor did he flinch, even as the runes flared brightly for a moment before settling into a steady, otherworldly glow. His respect for the mage grew with each passing second. Here was someone who understood the weight of their task, someone who poured their very soul into their work. In the background, the sound of hammer and anvil rang out in a steady rhythm. The master of the forge continued his work, shaping another piece of armor with the same dedication and skill. The two artisans, one of metal and one of magic, worked in harmony, their efforts combining to create something truly extraordinary. Torin felt a swell of pride and determination within him. This was what they fought for, this unity of skill and magic, this relentless pursuit of excellence. The runes she etched were more than mere symbols. They were a promise of protection, a testament to the resilience and strength of those who would wear the armor. Torin watched, his heart filled with a quiet resolve. They were readying themselves for the battles ahead, preparing to stand against the darkness that threatened their world. And in this forge, amidst the glow of runes and the ring of hammer on anvil, they were creating the tools they would need to fight for Lysaria's future. Raylan sat in the dim light of the ancient library, the scent of old parchment and ink filling the air. He held a tome in his weathered hands, its pages brittle but still legible. His eyes scanned the text, his mind absorbing the rich history contained within. Across from him, Thorian sat with his eyes closed, his senses attuned to every word Raylan spoke. The Sentinels of the Veil were not just warriors, Raylan read aloud, his voice steady and measured. They were guardians of ancient magic, protectors of the delicate balance between our world and the realms beyond. Shadowspire Keep was their stronghold, a place imbued with powerful enchantments and hidden knowledge. Thorian nodded slightly, indicating his rapt attention. Raylan continued, "There are mentions of an ancient memorial temple and burial ground not far from here. This site was revered by the Sentinels, a sacred place where their greatest champions were laid to rest." Thorian's eyes snapped open, the clouded orbs focusing intently on Raylan. "Tell me that part again," he instructed, his voice calm but commanding, "and see if you can find more about it." Raylan turned the page, his fingers gently brushing the fragile paper. "These are the burial grounds of the Sentinels of the Veil," he repeated, "a place where their spirits are said to linger, watching over the lands they once protected. The memorial temple, built to honor their sacrifices, stands as a testament to their enduring legacy." Thorian stood up, his posture rigid with newfound determination. "We need to learn everything we can about this place," he said, his voice carrying the weight of urgency. "It may hold the key to unlocking more of the Sentinel's power, or perhaps even provide us with allies in our struggle against King Eric." Raylan nodded, his eyes scanning the shelves around them. "There must be more references in these texts," he mused. "I'll continue searching. The Sentinels left behind many secrets, and if this temple is as important as it seems, we must uncover its full history." Thorian moved closer to the shelves, his fingers brushing against the spines of the books. "Time is of the essence," he murmured. "We must be prepared for whatever lies ahead." Raylan's eyes narrowed in concentration as he pulled another book from the shelf, its cover adorned with symbols of the old order. "Let's see what more we can find," he said, his voice filled with resolve. Nearby, Sir Alden observed Merrin's training with a mixture of pride and concern. Merrin moved with a speed and precision that belied his young age, his sword flashing in the afternoon sun as he parried and struck against an invisible opponent. His movements were fluid, almost instinctual, and Alden couldn't help but admire the boy's progress. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Merrin," Alden finally said, stepping forward. "Take a break." Merrin paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "I need to be ready," he insisted, his voice resolute. "I need to protect Sarala. I can't afford to rest." Alden placed a hand on Merrin's shoulder, his grip firm yet gentle. "Your dedication is commendable, but remember, strength comes from balance. Overworking yourself will only lead to mistakes." Merrin looked up at Alden, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I want to prove myself. I want to be strong enough to help." "You already have," Alden reassured him. "Your progress is remarkable. Just remember, it's not just about the fight, it's about the endurance to see it through." Merrin nodded, taking Alden's words to heart. He sheathed his sword and took a deep breath, the tension in his muscles slowly easing. As the day wore on, the preparations within Shadowspire continued. Every corner of the keep was alive with activity, each person contributing to the collective effort. As they continued reading, Raylan suddenly halted, his finger tracing an underlined passage. "Wait," he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and urgency. "It speaks of a hidden compartment in the library." Thorian's clouded eyes sharpened, his senses immediately on high alert. "A hidden compartment?" he echoed, his voice tinged with intrigue. Raylan stood, his gaze sweeping the room. "Yes, somewhere within these walls," he replied, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the stonework and shelves. Thorian closed his eyes, extending his mind outward, scanning the room with a meticulous focus. The air seemed to hum with energy as he probed for any anomalies. Raylan moved along the walls, his fingers brushing against the rough stone, seeking any sign of a hidden mechanism. After much searching, Raylan paused, his hand resting against a section of the wall. A faint, cool draft brushed against his skin. "Thorian," he called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come here." Thorian moved to Raylan's side, his hand reaching out to the same spot. He felt the subtle movement of air, confirming Raylan's discovery. "There's definitely something here," he muttered. With a few ancient words spoken under his breath, the stonework glowed faintly, revealing the outline of a concealed door. "There's your door," Thorian said, a slight smile playing on his lips. Raylan pressed against the door, trying to budge it, but it remained stubbornly closed, clearly untouched for countless years. "It hasn't been opened in a long time," he noted, frustration evident in his tone. Thorian stepped forward, placing his palm flat against the stone. He whispered an incantation, his voice resonating with power. The stone shivered and began to move, grinding slowly as it yielded to his magic. The door creaked open, revealing a dark passage beyond. Raylan and Thorian exchanged a look of triumph, the hidden compartment now accessible. Deep within the bowels of Shadowspire Keep, Thorian and Raylan navigated the labyrinthine corridors that led to the hidden library. The air was thick with dust, and the flickering light of their torches cast eerie shadows on the stone walls. Despite the oppressive silence, an aura of ancient knowledge and forgotten power filled the space. Thorian's blind eyes, clouded and unseeing, moved as if they could perceive the hidden currents of magic that still lingered in the air. "This way," he murmured, his voice a whisper against the cold stone. Raylan followed closely, his keen eyes scanning the surroundings with a scholar's intensity. They reached an old wooden door, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly in response to their presence. Thorian raised a hand, and the runes flared briefly before the door creaked open, revealing a vast chamber lined with shelves of ancient tomes and scrolls. Raylan's eyes widened in awe. "This place. It's incredible," he breathed, stepping inside. "The knowledge contained here could change the course of our battle." Thorian nodded, though his expression remained focused. "We must find the texts on the Knights of the Vale." They moved deeper into the library, their fingers brushing against the aged spines of books and scrolls. Hours passed as they pored over the ancient texts, the flickering torchlight their only companion. At last, Raylan's eyes lit up as he pulled a dusty tome from the shelf. "Thorian, look at this," Raylan said, excitement tinging his voice. He placed the book on a nearby table and opened it, revealing pages filled with intricate illustrations and detailed accounts of the Knights of the Vale. Thorian leaned in, his senses attuned to the magical resonance of the text. The Knights of the Vale were formidable warriors, guardians against dark magic. This could be what we need. "Here," Raylan said, pointing to a passage that described a temple hidden deep within the mountains of Lysaria. The hidden library had given them the key, and now it was up to them to unlock the power that could save Lysaria. The forge's heat radiated through the underground chamber, casting a fierce glow on Torin and the master blacksmith as they worked. The clang of hammer on metal echoed through the stone walls, a rhythmic testament to their tireless efforts. "Pass me the tongs," Torin instructed, his voice steady despite the intensity of the work. The master blacksmith, a seasoned dwarf with a face etched by years of labor, handed over the tongs without hesitation. Together, they maneuvered the blade back into the roaring forge, its edges glowing a brilliant orange. As the metal heated, Moralen entered the forge, her presence a calm counterbalance to the frenetic energy of the blacksmiths. She approached the anvil where the unfinished blade lay, her eyes assessing the weapon with a critical gaze. "Time to weave the runes," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. Torin nodded, stepping aside to give her space. Moralen produced a set of delicate chisels and a vial of shimmering liquid. With a deft hand, she began to inscribe intricate symbols along the blade's surface. Each stroke of her chisel was precise, every rune a conduit for ancient magic. The air seemed to hum with energy as Moralen worked, the runes glowing faintly with each completed symbol. Torin watched with a mix of admiration and respect. "These runes will make the blade unlike any other," he remarked. Moralen glanced up, a small smile playing at her lips. "It's not just about the strength, it's about the purpose." Sir Alden was summoned to the forge, his footsteps echoing through the ancient stone corridors of Shadowspire Keep. He had caught snippets of conversation about the work being undertaken, the collaborative efforts of Torin, the master blacksmith, and Moralen, the hawk-eyed mage. Yet, no amount of rumor could have prepared him for the scene that awaited. As he stepped into the forge, the intense heat wrapped around him like a cloak, and the sight before him stole his breath. Torin stood beside a suit of armor and a gleaming blade, both masterpieces that far surpassed anything Alden had ever encountered. Marielyn, her hands still shimmering with residual magic, acknowledged him with a knowing smile, her piercing gaze softened by a rare moment of camaraderie. Alden's mouth fell open as he absorbed the sight. The armor was a marvel of steel and enchantment, each piece meticulously crafted and inscribed with protective runes that emitted a soft, ethereal glow. The blade, sharp and impeccably balanced, seemed to hum with an intrinsic energy, resonating with the ancient magic woven into its core. "This is the armor and the blade worthy of a king," Torin declared, his voice brimming with pride and steadfast conviction. Alden could only stand in awe, his heart pounding in his chest. Throughout his life, he had donned many suits of armor and wielded countless blades, but none had ever felt so profoundly right. Torin stepped closer, his intense, steely gaze locking onto Alden's. "You are our leader, Alden. Be our king. Be our champion. Be our hero. Be the slayer of demons and evil forces. Be the protector of the heir." The weight of Torin's words hit Alden like a physical blow. He had always envisioned himself as a knight, a protector, but never as a king, never as the beacon of hope and strength his people desperately needed. The enormity of the responsibility being placed upon him pressed down on him, and for a fleeting moment he was unsure how to respond. Slowly, he sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment and the unwavering support of his allies. His voice, barely above a whisper, was thick with gratitude and steely determination. "Thank you." In that instant, surrounded by the glow of the forge and the encouraging presence of Torin and Marielyn, Alden felt an internal shift. The armor and blade were not merely tools, they were tangible symbols of the faith and hope entrusted to him by his people. With that faith bolstering him, he knew he could rise to meet the challenge ahead. Sir Robert and the mages approached Shadowspire, the imposing fortress looming ahead like a sentinel of ancient times. The heavy wooden gates, fortified with iron bands, stood resolute against the surrounding forest. The air was thick with anticipation and urgency, the group keenly aware of the danger pressing upon them. Robert raised his voice, his tone authoritative and unwavering. "Open the gates." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then the sound of gears turning and chains clinking echoed through the dense foliage. The massive gates creaked open, revealing the courtyard beyond. Without hesitation, the knights and mages sprinted through the gap, their footsteps a thunderous chorus on the cobblestones. Once inside, the gates clanged shut, sealing them in a temporary sanctuary. A mage, his face lined with concern, scanned the gathering. "Where is Thorian?" he demanded, his voice edged with anxiety. Marin approached the mage, his nod firm and reassuring. "I will prepare a meeting." The group moved with purpose through the winding corridors of Shadowspire, eventually arriving at a spacious room dominated by an oval table. The table, carved from dark wood and polished by time, was surrounded by seats quickly occupied by the key figures of the resistance. Sarala, still recovering but resolute, joined them, her presence a beacon of hope. As everyone settled, Sir Alden took the lead. "We welcome you to Shadowspire," he began, his voice steady. "Let's discuss what has transpired and what we expect moving forward." The room filled with the sound of voices, each recounting their recent battles and hardships. The mages detailed their harrowing journey and the loss of Eldrick, their words heavy with sorrow. They spoke of the hellish horseman and the dark magic that seemed to tighten its grip on Lysaria with each passing day. Sir Robert, his face etched with determination, leaned forward. "We must fortify our defenses and prepare for the next assault. King Eric will not rest until he has crushed us." Marielyn nodded, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Our magic can bolster the keep's defenses, but we need time to weave the enchantments." Sarala, her voice soft yet filled with resolve, added, "And we must continue to train and grow stronger. The pendant's power is still largely untapped." The conversation flowed, strategies forming and alliances strengthening. Each word spoken around that table was a step toward reclaiming Lysaria, a collective vow to stand against the darkness. The mages and knights, including Sir Alden, gathered around the oval table. Sarala, still pale but determined, sat among them, her presence lending an air of gravity to the room. The weight of recent events hung over them like a storm cloud, each face marked by concern and resolve. "Welcome," Sir Alden began, his voice steady but tinged with weariness. "We have much to discuss." Thorian, his blind eyes seemingly gazing into the depths of the room, nodded in acknowledgement. "We face a formidable foe. King Eric's forces grow bolder and darker with each passing day." The discussion began in earnest, voices rising and falling like the tides. Sir Robert recounted their perilous journey, the loss of Eldrick still fresh in their minds. The mages listened intently, their expressions grave. "We must fortify our defenses," Marilyn interjected, her tone sharp. "Shadowspire can be made impregnable, but it will require time and cooperation." "Time we may not have," countered Torin, his voice gruff. "Eric's forces could be upon us at any moment." The room buzzed with overlapping voices, some raised in urgency, others in cautious deliberation. Sir Alden leaned forward, his face resolute. "We cannot afford to act separately. Unity is our greatest weapon." Sarala, her voice soft yet filled with conviction, added, "The pendant's power is still largely unknown to me, but with training, I can harness it to our advantage." Marin, seated beside her, nodded in agreement. "We need every edge we can get. Sarala's magic could turn the tide." Thorian's voice cut through the murmurs, calm yet commanding. "We must combine our strengths: magic, steel, and strategy. It is the only way to stand against the darkness that Eric commands." The discussion continued, sometimes erupting into heated exchanges, other times descending into hushed whispers. Each word spoken was weighed with the fate of Lysaria. Dwarves and humans toiled side by side, their combined efforts turning Shadowspire Keep into a fortress bristling with defenses. Stone by stone, they reinforced the walls, adding layers of protection against the inevitable siege. Blacksmiths hammered away, crafting intricate traps designed to maim and delay any who dared to breach their gates. Torin oversaw the work with a keen eye, barking orders and offering encouragement. His people, accustomed to the depths of the earth, worked tirelessly, their hands as steady as their resolve. The humans, inspired by the dwarves' dedication, matched their pace, creating a harmonious rhythm of labor. Meanwhile, riders rode out in pairs, scouting the surrounding forests and hills for any sign of approaching forces. Their horses' hooves drummed against the ground, carrying them swiftly through the underbrush. Eyes sharp, they scanned for the glint of armor or the flicker of torchlight that would signal an enemy's advance. In the courtyard, Sir Alden tested his newly forged armor and blade. Clad in the masterful suit crafted by Torin and enhanced by Marilyn's enchantments, he faced off against his best knights. The clang of steel echoed as he moved with practiced precision, his blade a blur of deadly grace. "Come at me, Robert," Alden called, his voice a challenge and a command. Robert lunged, but Alden sidestepped, deflecting the blow with ease. Another knight joined the fray, but Alden's movements were fluid, his strikes both swift and decisive. He was formidable, a living testament to the skill and craftsmanship of the dwarves and the power of human determination. Elsewhere in the keep, Raylan and Thorian delved deeper into the library's hidden recesses. Shelves lined with ancient tomes and scrolls stretched out before them, a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge. They worked in tandem, their hands brushing over the worn leather bindings and brittle parchment. Raylan pulled a particularly thick volume from a shelf, its cover embossed with the sigil of the Sentinels of the Veil. "This one looks promising," he remarked, setting it down on a nearby table. Thorian nodded, his fingers tracing the raised emblem. "Let's see what secrets it holds." They pored over the text, discovering detailed accounts of the temple and cemetery associated with the Sentinels. The temple, a place of worship and power, was described as a sanctuary where ancient rituals were performed. The cemetery, hallowed ground, held the remains of countless guardians, their spirits still believed to watch over the land. Thorian listened intently, absorbing every word. Their exploration yielded not just knowledge, but hope, a glimmer of light in the shadow of their impending battle. Thorian had called for a meeting. The atmosphere in the war room was tense as everyone took their seats around the oval table. Mages, knights, dwarves, villagers, Marin, and Sarala all were present, their faces etched with worry and determination. Thorian, standing at the head of the table, waited until the murmurs of conversation ceased. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "The dark force we've been sensing," he began, his voice grave, has at last revealed itself. A collective shiver seemed to pass through the room. Marin leaned forward, eyes wide with concern. Sarala, her pendant still glowing faintly, listened intently. "This is very dangerous," Thorian continued, his brow furrowed. "None other than the Shadow King has King Eric in his grasp. He is behind all this chaos." Gasps of shock and disbelief echoed around the table. Sir Alden clenched his fists, his knuckles white. Raylan exchanged a worried glance with Marilyn, who looked pale but resolute. "But who is the Shadow King?" one of the villagers dared to ask, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Thorian sighed deeply, the weight of history pressing down on him. "The Shadow King," he began, "is an ancient and malevolent entity. During the War of the Fractured Crown, his influence spread like a plague, corrupting and dividing the realm. It was his dark machinations that led to the crown's fracturing, pitting noble houses against each other and plunging Lysaria into chaos." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "Back then, we had the Sentinels of the Veil to protect us. They were powerful warrior mages dedicated to maintaining balance and safeguarding our realm's magic. But now, we have no such guardians." A heavy silence filled the room as the enormity of their situation settled over them. Thorian's eyes swept over the assembled group, seeing the fear and determination mirrored in their faces. "But," Thorian added, his voice taking on a note of hope, "there is a glimmer of hope. If the Shadow King reveals himself now, it means he fears what we can do. Our united strength poses a threat to him." Sarala, emboldened by Thorian's words, straightened in her chair. Marin gave her a reassuring nod. "We must prepare," Thorian concluded. "Our unity and resolve are our greatest weapons. Together, we can stand against the Shadow King and restore balance to Lysaria." "There is a place not far from here that might give us more answers," Thorian continued, his eyes scanning the room. "We should form a strong, well-protected party and seek it out. The secrets it holds may be what we need." Raylan nodded in agreement, his expression resolute. "Raylan and I should be able to find it." Alden shook his head, a frown creasing his brow. "We shouldn't divide our strength now. We should stay united." "Maybe," Raylan said thoughtfully, "but we need to find this place. It is not far from here." The room fell silent as everyone considered the weight of Raylan's words. The tension was palpable, each person wrestling with the risks and rewards of the proposed expedition. "Very well," Alden conceded, his voice steady. "We'll form a party, but it must be strong and well protected." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Plans were quickly laid out. Torin, with his unyielding resolve, volunteered to lead the dwarves in fortifying Shadowspire Keep while the others were away. "I'll ensure the defenses hold," Torin declared, his eyes burning with determination. Sarala, still recovering but eager to contribute, insisted on joining the party. "I can't just sit here and wait," she argued, her pendant glowing with renewed vigor. "My magic can help." Raylan placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze soft yet firm. "You are indeed strong, Sarala, but you must conserve your energy. We'll need your strength for the battles ahead." Marin, standing beside Sarala, voiced his support. "I'll go with you. Sarala's right. We need to act, not just wait." Alden considered the proposal, his eyes narrowing as he weighed their options. Finally, he nodded. "Marin, Sarala, you'll come with us, but we move cautiously." Thorian, Raylan, Alden, Marin, and Sarala formed the core of the party, each member equipped and ready for the journey. The rest of the group, including Torin and the remaining knights, prepared to defend the keep. As the party gathered their supplies and made final preparations, Thorian and Raylan shared a brief, knowing glance. They both understood the significance of the place they sought and the potential answers it could provide. With a sense of urgency and determination, the party set out from Shadowspire Keep, leaving behind the fortified walls and the comforting presence of their allies. They ventured into the unknown, driven by the hope that the secrets they sought would help them defeat the Shadow King and restore balance to Lysaria. The party that set out from Shadowspire Keep comprised 5 key members, each bringing unique strengths to the mission. Thorian, the blind mage, led them, his wisdom and experience providing a guiding light through the darkness that enveloped Lysaria. Despite his lack of sight, Thorian's magical abilities and deep understanding of ancient lore made him an invaluable leader. Raylan, the sage, walked beside him. His elemental mastery and tactical acumen complemented Thorian's knowledge. Raylan had mentored Sarala, guiding her through the basics of magic and preparing her for the immense responsibility that lay ahead. His calm demeanor and strategic mind were assets the group relied on. Alden, the knight with a troubled past, provided the party's martial strength. His experience on the battlefield, coupled with his leadership skills, made him the party's stalwart protector. Clad in the enchanted armor forged by Torin and the master blacksmith, Alden carried a sword imbued with protective runes, ready to face any threat that came their way. Sarala, the young girl with the powerful pendant, was the heart of the party. Her innate magical abilities, though still developing, had already shown great potential. The pendant she wore not only connected her to the ancient magic of Lysaria, but also marked her as a key figure in the prophecy to restore balance to the land. Her determination to uncover the secrets of her past and her role in the prophecy fueled her resolve. Marin, Sarala's steadfast companion, rounded out the group. His unwavering loyalty to Sarala and his burgeoning skills in both combat and strategy made him an indispensable ally. Though not a mage, Marin had proven his worth time and again, standing by Sarala through every trial they had faced. Together, this diverse group set out with a shared purpose, to seek the answers that might turn the tide against the Shadow King and bring hope back to Lysaria. Their journey was fraught with danger, but their combined strengths gave them a fighting chance against the encroaching darkness. The forest closed in around them, dense with shadows and the rustling whispers of unseen creatures. Thorian led the way, his steps confident despite his blindness. His fingers traced invisible patterns in the air, sensing the magical currents that guided their path. Raylan walked beside him, eyes sharp and vigilant. "We must remain cautious," he murmured. "The Shadow King's reach extends further than we know." Alden, bringing up the rear, kept a watchful eye on the surroundings. "We've faced worse," he said, his voice steady. The weight of his enchanted armor was a reassuring presence. "We'll handle whatever comes our way." Sarala, positioned between Raylan and Alden, clutched her pendant. The energy within it pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She felt its power, a constant reminder of her role in the unfolding prophecy. Marin walked close by, his gaze flicking between Sarala and the path ahead. The group moved in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The path they followed was narrow and overgrown, but it was the safest route Raylan knew. "Where exactly are we headed?" Marin finally asked, breaking the quiet. "There's an ancient site not far from here," Thorian replied. "A place where the veil between our world and the magical realms is thin. It's said to hold answers, perhaps even allies." "Let's hope it holds what we need," Alden said, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. As they continued, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and older, their trunks twisted and gnarled. The air grew cooler, and a faint, almost musical hum filled the air. It was as if the very forest itself was alive with magic. "We're close," Raylan said, his voice tinged with awe. They reached a clearing, dominated by a large stone archway covered in ancient runes. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. Thorian stepped forward, his hands tracing the runes with a delicate touch. "These runes speak of protection and hidden knowledge," he said. "We must proceed carefully." Alden drew his sword, the blade glinting in the dim light. "I'll take point. Raylan, Sarala, stay close to Thorian. Marin, watch our flank." The group moved through the archway, the air shimmering around them as they passed. Beyond it, the forest seemed even more alive, the magic almost tangible. They had entered a place where the boundaries of reality were thin, where the ancient secrets of Lysaria might finally be revealed. The group pressed on through the dense woods, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. Their footsteps were muffled by the soft, moss-covered ground, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees growing closer together, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that filtered the sunlight into a dappled pattern on the forest floor. Suddenly, a low growl broke the silence. Alden halted, raising a hand to signal the others to stop. His eyes scanned the shadows, muscles tense. From the underbrush emerged a large, wolf-like creature with fur as black as midnight and eyes that glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. It snarled, baring its teeth. "Stand back," Alden ordered, stepping forward with his sword at the ready. Raylan and Thorian quickly positioned themselves to either side of Sarala, who clutched her pendant tightly, feeling its warmth. Marin drew his blade, ready to defend. "We can't let it separate us," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. The creature lunged, and Alden met it head-on, his sword clashing with its claws. The beast was strong, but Alden's enchanted armor absorbed the brunt of its blows. Raylan and Thorian chanted in unison, summoning a burst of light that momentarily blinded the creature, giving Alden the opening he needed. With a swift, powerful strike, he drove his sword into the beast's side. It let out a pained howl before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. "Is everyone all right?" Alden asked, breathing heavily as he wiped his sword clean. "We're fine," Sarala replied, her grip on the pendant relaxing. "Thank you." They resumed their journey, moving with renewed caution. The encounter had shaken them, but it also strengthened their resolve. They pressed on, the forest gradually changing around them once more. The trees grew older, their trunks thicker and their branches more gnarled. A sense of ancient power permeated the air. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a clearing. Before them lay the sacred cemetery, a place of eerie beauty and profound stillness. The graves were marked by weathered stone slabs, each inscribed with runes and symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Moss and ivy crept over the stones, intertwining with the carvings in a delicate embrace. Tall, ancient trees surrounded the cemetery, their roots weaving through the graves, as if nature itself guarded this hallowed ground. In the center of the cemetery stood a large, ornate mausoleum, its stone walls adorned with intricate carvings and more glowing runes. The air here was thick with magic, a palpable presence that seemed to hum with the energy of the ages. "This is it," Thorian said softly, his voice filled with reverence. "The sacred cemetery. We've found it." The sacred cemetery stretched before them, a somber testament to time and history. The air was thick with an almost tangible sense of reverence, every stone and statue exuding an aura of ancient power. Each grave was marked by a weathered stone slab, some leaning precariously as if bowed under the weight of countless years. The inscriptions on the stones were in a language long forgotten by most, but the runes glowed faintly, as though the spirits of the past still lingered, watching over the resting place of their ancestors. Moss and ivy had taken hold of the stones, their green tendrils creeping over the runes and intertwining with the carvings. The natural embrace gave the cemetery a sense of being reclaimed by the earth, a harmonious blend of life and death. The tall, ancient trees surrounding the graves seemed to guard the sacred ground, their roots weaving through the earth, anchoring the stones in place. In the center of the cemetery stood the mausoleum, an imposing structure of stone and magic. Its walls were adorned with intricate carvings, depicting scenes of valor and sorrow, of battles fought and lives lost. The runes on the mausoleum glowed more brightly than those on the graves, their light pulsating in a slow, rhythmic pattern, as if the building itself were alive, breathing with the energy of the ages. Statues flanked the entrance to the mausoleum, each one a masterful work of art. One statue depicted a knight in full armor, sword raised high in a gesture of eternal vigilance. The other statue was of a robed figure, a mage, holding a staff that seemed to crackle with latent energy. Their expressions were solemn, their eyes gazing out over the cemetery as if standing eternal watch over the hallowed ground. A strange wind blew through the clearing, rustling the leaves and causing the runes to flicker. It carried with it whispers of the past, ghostly murmurs that seemed to speak of long-forgotten tales and ancient secrets. The wind wound its way through the cemetery, lifting leaves and causing the ivy to dance around the gravestones. It brought with it a chill, not of cold, but of an ethereal presence, a reminder that this place was steeped in magic and history. The group stood in silence, absorbing the weight of the atmosphere. The wind brushed past them, tugging at their cloaks and hair, as if urging them forward, deeper into the heart of the cemetery, toward the mausoleum and the secrets it held. The party moved through the graveyard with deliberate caution, each step carefully placed to avoid disturbing the resting places of those who had come before them. The air was thick with an unseen force. It was as if the spirits of the sentinels of the Vale, long forgotten by the world, still lingered, their presence felt in every rustle of leaves and flicker of runes. Sarala paused by a gravestone, her fingers brushing over the faintly glowing runes. "Sir Gideon Thorne," she read aloud, her voice a whisper, "fell defending the northern border against the Wraith Legion." The inscription continued, detailing his bravery and the many lives he had saved with his sacrifice. Nearby, Alden knelt beside another stone, his eyes tracing the name etched into the weathered surface. "Lady Ilara Stormwind," he murmured, "perished in the Battle of the Fractured Crown, struck down by dark magic." The gravestone bore a carving of a fierce warrior, her face set in a determined expression, a testament to her valor. Marin, always curious, wandered a bit further and found a small cluster of graves. "These are the graves of the Sentinel's apprentices," she said softly, pointing to the names. "Young and full of promise, lost in the Great Purge when magic was outlawed. They knew the stories well, had studied them in the ancient texts. Here, those tales were given form, each gravestone a chapter in the long and storied history of the Sentinels of the Vale." As they moved deeper into the graveyard, the presence of magic grew stronger, almost overwhelming. The runes on the gravestones glowed brighter, and the air seemed to hum with an unseen energy. It was as if the very ground they walked on was infused with the remnants of the spells cast by the Sentinels, their magic woven into the fabric of the earth itself. The party strode carefully, aware of the significance of the place. Each step was taken with respect, each name read with reverence. They felt the eyes of the past upon them, the presence of those who had dedicated their lives to protecting Lysaria. The long-forgotten Sentinels were not truly gone. Their legacy lived on in the stones and the magic that surrounded them. Together, they continued their journey across the graveyard, the mausoleum drawing ever closer, its light guiding them forward through the silent watch of the past. The mausoleum stood at the center of the cemetery, an imposing structure of aged stone and intricate carvings. The exterior walls were covered in ivy, tendrils creeping over the faded engravings that depicted scenes of battles and moments of valor. Statues of ancient warriors flanked the entrance, their expressions solemn and watchful, as if guarding the secrets within. Above the arched doorway, an inscription in an old dialect of the magical language read, "Here rest the Sentinels, guardians of Lysaria's light." The runes pulsed faintly, a testament to the enduring magic that still lingered in this sacred place. The massive wooden doors, reinforced with iron bands, were partially ajar, creaking softly in the breeze that whispered through the graveyard. The party approached the mausoleum with a mix of awe and trepidation. Each step echoed on the stone path, the sound swallowed by the dense, magical atmosphere. Sarala's pendant glowed softly, resonating with the ancient energy that surrounded them. Alden placed a hand on the door, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. Nods from the others. Together, they pushed the doors open, the heavy wood groaning in protest. The interior of the mausoleum revealed itself slowly, shadows retreating from the light that spilled in from outside. Inside, the mausoleum was a testament to the passage of time and the decay that had set in. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient dust. Columns lined the walls, their surfaces cracked and worn, yet still bearing the remnants of once detailed carvings. The floor was littered with debris, fallen stones, broken tiles, and remnants of long-forgotten artifacts. At the center of the mausoleum stood a grand sarcophagus, its lid slightly askew. It was adorned with intricate reliefs depicting the life and deeds of the sentinel entombed within. The lid's displacement revealed a glimpse of the skeletal remains, draped in tattered ceremonial robes. Stained glass windows, though now shattered, had once bathed the chamber in a kaleidoscope of colors. The fragments lay scattered on the floor, their vibrant hues dulled by time and grime. The light that filtered through the broken panes cast eerie patterns on the walls, dancing with the flickering glow of Sarala's pendant. Ancient tapestries, now mere tatters, hung from the walls, their once bright colors faded and designs barely discernible. In one corner, an altar stood, covered in dust and cobwebs, with the remnants of ritual objects strewn about, a tarnished chalice, a rusted dagger, and a cracked crystal orb. The party moved cautiously through the ruined mausoleum, the weight of history pressing down on them. Every step was careful, respectful, as they took in the somber beauty of the place. This was a sanctuary for the fallen, a monument to the sentinels who had given their lives to protect Lysaria. The party moved slowly through the mausoleum, their eyes absorbing the grandeur and decay. The air was thick with history, each step echoing with the whispers of the past. Symbols etched into the stone walls glowed faintly, their magical essence still potent after all these years. Ancient runes, spirals, and sigils adorned every surface, telling stories of valor and sacrifice. Sarala paused by one of the columns, tracing her fingers over a series of interlocking circles. "What do these mean?" she asked, her voice reverent. Thorian stepped closer, his sightless eyes seemingly seeing more than those with vision. "Those are the symbols of unity and protection," he said. "They were used during ceremonies to invoke the collective strength of the sentinels." Alden nodded, standing by a large mural depicting a battle scene. "And these?" He pointed to the intricate designs woven into the warrior's armor. "Those are the marks of the High Guardians," Thorian explained. "Each symbol represents a virtue, courage, wisdom, honor. They were bestowed upon the sentinels during rites of passage, marking their readiness to defend Lysaria." Marin, standing near the altar, picked up the tarnished chalice, inspecting the delicate engravings. "This must have been used in their rituals," she mused. Thorian nodded. Indeed, the chalice was central to the ceremonies of light. It held the elixir of unity, a potion brewed from the essence of sacred herbs and imbued with powerful enchantments. Drinking from it symbolized the merging of their spirits with the magic of Lysaria. Raylan, near the grand sarcophagus, brushed away the dust to reveal a series of glyphs. "And these glyphs?" he asked. "Those," Thorian began, "are the oaths of the Veil. Each sentinel would carve their personal vow into the sarcophagus upon their induction. It was a pledge to uphold their duties, even in death. Their magic and essence remained bound to this place, ensuring its protection." The group fell silent, contemplating the weight of the history around them. The mausoleum was not just a resting place, but a testament to the enduring legacy of the sentinels. Every symbol, every artifact was a piece of a larger story, a story of sacrifice, honor, and unyielding duty. Sarala's pendant glowed brighter, resonating with the ancient energy. She felt a deep connection to this place, a sense of belonging. The mausoleum's silent guardians seemed to watch over them, their presence a reminder of the past and a guide for the future. Thorian's voice broke the silence. Ceremonies were held here to honor the fallen and to induct new sentinels. The rituals were elaborate, filled with chants, incantations, and the sharing of the elixir. It was a time of great reverence, a reaffirmation of their commitment to protect Lysaria. The party listened, their respect for the sentinels deepening with every word. The symbols and artifacts around them were not just relics, they were the echoes of a noble legacy that had shaped their world. As they moved deeper into the mausoleum, a strange light began to envelop the chamber. It grew eerie, casting elongated shadows that danced unsettlingly along the walls. The ground beneath them started to tremble, causing dust to fall from the ancient ceiling. Sarala gripped her pendant tighter, her heartbeat matching the tremors. An unease settled over the group, an instinctual sense that something was not right. Before their eyes, a faint apparition began to take shape. It started as a mist, swirling and condensing until it formed the vague outline of a figure. A howling sound erupted from the apparition, so piercing that they all clutched their ears in agony. The creature continued to materialize, its form solidifying into that of a spectral guardian, clad in ethereal armor. The hollow eyes of the apparition bore into them, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "Who goes there?" the voice echoed through the chamber, resonating with a power that seemed to come from the very stones. "None are allowed in this sacred place." Alden stepped forward, instinctively moving to shield his companions. His hand went to his sword, ready to draw and defend. "No," Thorian's voice was firm, cutting through the tension. "Don't draw the blade. No hostile actions." Alden hesitated, his hand falling away from the hilt. The apparition's gaze turned to Thorian, its form shimmering with ancient magic. "None can disturb the sentinels," the creature intoned, its voice filled with authority. Thorian stepped forward, opening his palm. The pendant around Sarala's neck responded, glowing with a shining, blinding light that filled the mausoleum. "Except for the heir," Thorian declared, his voice echoing with conviction. The light from the pendant intensified, casting away the shadows and illuminating the entire chamber. The apparition recoiled slightly, its form wavering as it acknowledged the pendant's power. A sense of anticipation hung in the air, the very stones of the mausoleum seeming to hold their breath. The spectral guardian's gaze locked onto Thorian, its ethereal eyes narrowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the mage's very soul. "The pendant," the creature said, its voice a chilling echo in the ancient chamber. "Who are you that you can command it?" Thorian stood tall, his presence commanding despite his frail appearance. "Not I," he replied, his voice steady and calm, "but the true heir." The guardian's form flickered, uncertainty crossing its spectral features. "It is through her that I command the pendant," Thorian continued, his tone unwavering. "But this girl, Sarala, is the heir that will restore the magic to Lysaria." Sarala, standing beside Thorian, felt a surge of energy from the pendant. It pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, casting a warm, golden glow that filled the chamber with an almost sacred light. "It is she," Thorian said, gesturing towards Sarala, "that will defeat the Shadow King, your ancient enemy." The Guardian's eyes shifted to Sarala, studying her intently. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the soft hum of the pendant's magic. Then, the creature's form solidified, and it stared at Sarala with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. Without warning, the Guardian let out a deafening roar, a sound filled with both anger and pain. The walls of the mausoleum trembled, dust and debris cascading down like a waterfall. The force of the roar pushed the group back, their ears ringing from the sheer power of it. Sarala stood her ground, her eyes locked with the Guardian's. The pendant's light flared, pushing back against the creature's anger. Thorian, Raylan, Alden, and Marin braced themselves, ready to defend Sarala if needed. The Guardian's roar subsided, but its gaze remained fixed on Sarala. The challenge in its eyes was clear: prove your worth. Sarala, feeling the weight of her destiny, took a deep breath. The pendant's light continued to shine, a beacon of hope in the darkened chamber. She knew that this was only the beginning of her journey, and that the true test was yet to come. The spectral guardian's roar reverberated through the mausoleum, shaking the very foundations of the ancient structure. Sarala felt the vibration in her bones, her heart pounding in sync with the pendant's pulsating light. "I see the creature roared," Thorian said, his voice barely audible over the echoes. "I feel it." The Guardian's form seemed to waver, its eyes narrowing as it spoke directly into Thorian's mind. "You occupy the old keep, do you not?" Thorian nodded, understanding the weight of the question. The Guardian's expression turned thoughtful, as if contemplating the implications of this revelation. "I must think and talk this over with the spirits," the Guardian intoned, its voice filled with ancient wisdom. "I can feel the return of the evil already." A sense of urgency gripped the group as the Guardian's words settled over them. The air grew heavy with the promise of impending danger. "Go to Shadowspire," the guardian commanded. "Go back there and wait. Hurry." The creature's form began to shimmer, its edges blurring as it prepared to summon allies. "I will summon creatures that might not see you as allies," it warned, its voice growing more distant. Another roar, and the creature seemed to expand. "Go," Thorian shouted, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Go now!" The party didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled the mausoleum, their footsteps echoing in the silent, hallowed halls. As they burst out into the cemetery, the graves around them seemed to shudder, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Voices filled the air, ghostly whispers lamenting the disturbance. The group hurried through the ancient graveyard, their path illuminated by the eerie glow of the runes on the tombstones. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of sorrow and warning that urged them to move faster. Sarala clutched the pendant tightly, its warmth a comforting presence against the chill of the night. They reached the edge of the cemetery, the boundary marked by an ancient, crumbling wall. With one last glance at the mausoleum, they pushed forward into the forest, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The shadows of the trees enveloped them, but the urgency of the Guardian's command propelled them onward. They knew they had to reach Shadowspire Keep before the summoned creatures found them. The fate of Lysaria depended on it. The party hastened through the forest, urgency pushing them forward. Thorian led the way, his senses heightened despite his blindness. Raylan and Alden flanked Sarala, their eyes scanning the darkened woods for any signs of danger. Marin, ever vigilant, brought up the rear, ensuring their path remained clear. Shadowspire Keep loomed in the distance, a beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. As they approached, the sounds of preparation reached their ears, hammers striking anvils, voices raised in hurried commands, and the occasional clash of practiced swords. The keep was a hive of activity, every corner buzzing with the anticipation of battle. Inside the war room, mages and knights alike gathered, their faces set in grim determination. Torin stood at the center, his booming voice directing the fortifications. Dwarves and humans worked side by side, reinforcing walls, setting traps, and sharpening weapons. The mages, however, were less unified. Heated arguments erupted over past decisions and strategies. "How could you have allowed such darkness to take hold?" one mage accused, pointing a trembling finger at Thorian. "We should have acted sooner." Thorian's expression remained calm, though his voice carried a note of finality. "We did what we could with the knowledge we had. Blame will not help us now." Raylan stepped forward, his voice steady. "We must focus on the present. The past is a lesson, not a burden. We are stronger together." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Slowly, the mages nodded, the tension easing as they turned their attention back to the task at hand. Meanwhile, in the darkened halls of Eldarhelm, King Eric stirred from his despondence. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now burned with renewed determination. The whispers of his dark advisors had not fallen on deaf ears. He rose from his throne, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Summon the courtiers," he commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It is time to reclaim my power." The courtiers, a mix of nobles and dark entities, gathered quickly, their expressions a mix of fear and reverence. Eric stood before them, his presence commanding and malevolent. "Lysaria will bow before me," he declared, his voice dripping with malice. "We will crush this rebellion and ensure that magic remains under my control." The courtiers murmured their assent, the air thick with dark energy. Eric's eyes gleamed with the promise of victory, his mind already plotting the downfall of his enemies. The battle for Lysaria was far from over, and King Eric intended to emerge victorious. In the quiet moments before dawn, Shadowspire Keep was a place of subdued yet purposeful activity. The night's preparations had finally wound down, and those within the ancient fortress took what rest they could manage. Sarala lay on a cot in a secluded chamber, her mysterious pendant dimly glowing against her chest. Marin sat beside her, his hand gently resting on hers, watching her breathe steadily, his eyes filled with concern and resolve. In the adjacent room, Sir Alden, Torin, Thorian, and Raylan gathered around a map spread across a large wooden table. The remnants of their hurried meal lay pushed to the side, and the air was thick with the mingling scents of burning candles and parchment, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Alden traced a finger along the map, pointing out strategic locations with a sense of urgency. Here and here. We need to ensure these points are fortified. If Eric's forces breach these areas, they could easily overwhelm us. Torin nodded, his brow deeply furrowed in thought. We've got the trap set and the dwarves are ready, but we need more hands if we're to hold them off. Our numbers are too few. Raylan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples wearily. We'll make do with what we have. Our magic will need to support the physical defenses. Every spell must count, and we cannot afford any mistakes. Thorian, who had been silent until now, spoke softly, yet with a tone of gravity. Our greatest strength lies in our unity. Sarala's awakening has given us hope, but it also places a target on her back. We must protect her at all costs. Alden's gaze hardened, his eyes reflecting both determination and concern. She is our key, but she's also just a young girl, and we cannot forget that amidst our plans and strategies. The group fell silent, the weight of their responsibility settling over them like a heavy shroud. The fire in the hearth crackled, offering a momentary distraction from the gravity of their situation and casting flickering shadows on the walls. In the forge below, blacksmiths and enchanters worked tirelessly, their hammers ringing out in a rhythmic cadence that echoed through the stone corridors. Armor and weapons, newly forged and enchanted, were lined up against the walls, gleaming and ready for the battles ahead. Torin's voice could occasionally be heard, offering guidance, encouragement, and the wisdom of his years. Back in the keep's infirmary, healers moved among the injured with practiced grace, tending to wounds and offering words of comfort. The room was filled with the soothing scent of herbs and the low murmur of whispered reassurances. Despite the weariness in their eyes, there was a quiet determination that underpinned their every action. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, casting a gentle glow over the ancient stone, a sense of calm settled over Shadowspire Keep. It was a brief respite, a moment of collective breath before the storm. Those within the keep knew that the battle was far from over, but for now, they found solace in their unity and the strength they drew from one another. In this precious moment of rest, they prepared for what was to come. Their resolve steeled and their hearts unwavering. The fight for Lysaria was just beginning, and they would face it together, bound by a common purpose and an unbreakable bond. Far away at the cemetery, a dark mist curled and twisted among the ancient gravestones, shrouding the area in an ominous gloom. The creature, a ghastly figure draped in shadows, stood at the center of the mausoleum, summoning his spirits with an incantation that seemed to draw the very light from the air. The atmosphere crackled with an eerie energy as the spirits materialized, their whispers carrying secrets of the pendant, the true heir, and the ever-looming presence of the Shadow King. The spirits' whispers grew louder, evolving into a cacophony of hisses and murmurs. Their translucent forms flickered like dying embers, casting an unearthly glow that filled the mausoleum with a haunting light. Amidst this spectral gathering, a group of undead knights entered, their armor clanking with each step, echoing like a death knell. Leading them was Ardor, the great battle mage, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light that hinted at powers beyond mortal understanding. As the talk of the air intensified, Ardor's voice cut through the din like a blade. "What about the other?" Every ghostly head turned in astonishment. "What do you mean? What other?" one of the spirits asked, its voice a whisper of the wind, carrying an edge of fear and curiosity. Ardor sighed, the sound imbued with the weight of ancient knowledge and untold burdens. "Not even the Shadow King knows this," he said, his voice resonating with an authority that demanded attention. "There are two heirs, and they must work together for the pendant to reach its full power." Panic erupted among the spirits, their whispers turning into frantic shouts that reverberated off the stone walls. The mausoleum echoed with the sounds of chaos, the undead knights shifting uneasily as the air grew thick with tension. The very stones of the mausoleum seemed to vibrate with the weight of this revelation, as if the structure itself could sense the gravity of Ardor's words. Ardor raised his hand, his expression stern and commanding. The room fell silent once more, the spirits and knights alike falling into an uneasy stillness. His eyes, filled with a strange mix of determination and sorrow, scanned the room, ensuring that his message had been understood. The implications of his revelation hung heavy in the air, adding a new layer of complexity to the already perilous quest. A quest now fraught with the realization that the fate of the pendant, and perhaps the kingdom itself, depended on a unity that had long been forgotten.